If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this.
Night shift workers, cops, security guards, or anyone who's been alone in eerie, haunted places, what's your most bone-chilling paranormal encounter?
I used to work in a building that was rumored to be haunted, due to an employee 10 years prior jumping off the building. I'd worked alone in the building before and definitely heard all kinds of crazy noises that shouldn't be happening. Recently, they decided to move us to the other building, and on the day we were moving out, I thought aloud, I wonder what will happen to the ghost? And as I turned the corner, I saw someone I didn't recognize in a desk chair leaning back and then vanish. I thought, wow, was that the ghost, or am I imagining things? As I walked to the elevator opened unbidden. I was the only one in the building for at least an hour at that point, which I thought was weird, but I got in, and as I got in, it felt like a presence was in the elevator, and I heard, very audibly, with no one else on the floor, a male voice say, "Thanks." It felt like someone was on the elevator with me the whole way down. I hope the ghost felt free to go. While working as maintenance at an office building in Fort Worth, I had to come in late one Friday night because someone had broken a glass door in one of the suites and was trying to break in. Once the police and everyone else were gone, I still needed to clean up the door and put it in a temporary place to get through the weekend. It was about 1 a.m. once I was alone and trying to sweep up the glass door that had broken into a million little pieces. The door was at the end of a long hallway that was not that wide. While sweeping, I started to hear laughter very clearly and the faint sound of knocking and moaning, but the moaning was not pain but the sound of pleasure. I went looking through all the suites on the floor and could not find anyone, but I will say the more I looked through the building looking for who was making the noise, the faster my heart thumped in my chest. Finally, unable to locate the source of the noise and unable to leave, I summoned my girlfriend to the building to ensure I wouldn't be alone, hoping that my imagination was deceiving me. Once she was there for about 5 minutes, she too could hear the noise, but she said the moans were louder than the laughter. I took the last trash can full of glass out to the trash and came in to find my girlfriend white-faced and still in the hallway by my office door waiting for me. When I touched her, she snapped out of the daze and only said I needed to go home. I agreed with her, and we both drove home in my truck. Consequently, I never returned to the building alone after midnight again. Creepy thing that happened to me on a night shift. So it was the 3rd of March, and I was working the night shift. In my country we say third shift, and when it was coffee break time and everyone left except me, I stayed to finish the job. I work on a big printing machine, and you can shut it down from literally 5 sides. At one point the machine stopped and started beeping. I saw a shadow of someone going behind the machine. I rushed to see who it was and saw no one. I thought it was me tripping. I thought now that machine is off, I would put some new paint in it. I put a bucket on a scale and left it there to pour the paint in. When I did that, I went to the machine to see the trending and wrote down when the machine stopped. It said 3:33 and 33 seconds. I was like, okay, whatever, and didn't think about it that much. I went back to the dispenser to get the paint, and the scale showed 3.333 kilograms. There I was feeling scared. Just to remind you. It was the 3rd of March, 3 to 3. Night shift, 3rd shift, the time machine stopped at 3:33 and 33 seconds. The scale on a paint dispenser stopped at 3.333 kilograms. I saw a shadow going behind the machine. Later on my sister told me that there is a belief that at that time the monsters and demons are going out and that they are strongest at that time. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Maybe this does not sound that scary. English is my second language, so I don't know how to express that you can feel what I was feeling that night. I was hoping that someone who has had paranormal experiences similar to mine could help me out. Here is what happened. Tonight I closed. It was just like any other night. I was just ready to come home. I locked the doors and made sure no one was in the store and counted down the registers, like usual, and all of a sudden I heard a huge bang come from the back of the store. I and the cashier I had working with me looked at each other like, "Did you hear that?" So I told her to stay up here, and I'll go see since I was the one in charge, so I had the registers in a buggy, taking them to the back to put them in the safe like we do at night. You take a right to go in the back room, then take a left and another left to get into the office. I was unlocking the office door, and I heard something walking behind me, so I thought it was the cashier, and I thought she was going to ask me something or she got scared being by herself, but I turned around, and nothing was there, but then I heard what sounded like a little kid laugh, and then a screech sound. My right ear is ringing bad, it was so loud. I used to work in a local hospital as a housekeeper on night shifts. One particular night, a coworker and I were cleaning and closing up one of the empty units of the hospital for the night. My coworker was working at the far end of the unit, and I was at the front of it, No one else was in that unit of the hospital at that time of the night. As I was cleaning, I heard and saw one of the curtains shift over in a corner where a bunch of empty beds/stretchers were being stored. I thought it was just my coworker messing around and trying to scare me, so I crept up and ripped the curtain open. No one was there, though. I also had another experience one afternoon when I was cleaning up a room in the hospice unit. The call alert started going off for that room, even though I hadn't pushed the call button, and no one else was in the room. A nurse came in, shut it off, and told me that I'd be surprised how often that happens. So I have always been very curious about the supernatural. During COVID, I worked as a traveling mechanic for a commuter rail service. I had many responsibilities, but unfortunately, the one I had to deal with the most was suicide. During the heart of the pandemic, I was going 2 to 3 times a week. I pretty much had to make sure there was no damage and the train was safe to operate. I had one in late September where the victim was caught up in the power cables between the cars, and I had to assist in getting her untangled so the coroner could take the body away. I hadn't seen a body up close since my time in the military, and it was a bit unnerving. Fast forward around a week, and I was traveling back from a call when the weather changed dramatically almost instantaneously. I am talking about a good 20-degree drop and high winds. I was around a mile from my work trailer, and my truck just died. Now keep in mind I was working long, stress-filled hours during this time. I got out to pop the hood, and the truck cab temp dropped. I looked over, and the woman whose body I had helped untangle was sitting in the passenger seat, but I could see right through her. I fell out of the truck and ran across the street. A few minutes later it began to pour rain and hail. I went back to the truck, and she was gone. I still have nightmares about that night, which I will never forget. A few years ago I worked at a daycare. It was an old house renovated to be a daycare. In the room I was in, with 2-year-olds, there was a big shelf/cubby structure. It went almost all the way to the ceiling. The highest shelf was full of those little plastic baskets that contain crayons, coloring sheets, and other random classroom stuff. Some of the employees couldn't even reach up there, much less a bunch of 2-year-olds. One day, I was cleaning up after lunch, and some kids were playing, and some were following me around. I turned to throw something away. The second I did that, something fell. It was loud and startled me, and my first instinct was to see what the kids dropped. I was surprised to realize it was a basket of markers on the floor from the top of the shelf. It was strange, but I chalked it up to someone bumping around. My mom, also a coworker, came in and asked what happened, and when I told her, she just shook her head knowingly. My first reaction wasn't paranormal thoughts, of course, until a few days later. In the changing room, there's a bar that opens into the kitchen. The bottom part of the wall was a mirror. The kids liked to play in it while they awaited their changing turn. One day, the kids were being rowdy, so my mom took them so I could finish cleaning up the changing area. I heard a slight rustle and looked up. I saw an old pair of shoes and the bottom of an aged, white lace dress pass across the mirror. I couldn't even comprehend what I'd just seen. I told my mom about what I saw, and all she could say was yep. She'd worked there 10 years prior, so it wasn't anything new. I looked up the address after that. Turns out, a couple built the house nearly 100 years before and lived in it until the wife died. The husband couldn't care for himself any longer, so he was shipped off to a nursing home. The house sat empty and falling into disrepair for a few years when the daycare owner bought it and renovated the whole place. She believes the renovation and use of the house brought the lady around. According to everyone else, she seemed to like the kids, but I wasn't there much longer to find out. I work in the mortuary industry and have had a few strange experiences. My first night at a new job, the other mortician told me to turn the music up real loud while embalming and just have fun with it. Didn't think much about it. It was getting late, so she left and I got to work. A few minutes pass, perhaps 15 or 20, before I hear chairs moving around in the chapel. I walk into the chapel, the lights are on, and some chairs are moved. Assume it's the girl playing a prank on me, not uncommon in this industry. Look out the window, but her car's gone. Okay, whatever. Turn the lights off and shut the door, get back to work. A few minutes go by, and I hear the chairs moving around. This time I'm a bit more weary. Go back, the lights are on and the chapel doors are wide open. At this point, I'm completely overwhelmed. I could have sworn I just turned the lights off and shut the doors. This time, I make sure to turn off the lights and close the doors behind me. Sure enough, a few minutes pass and I hear the noises again. Terrified, I hastily complete the embalming process and swiftly exit the premises. On my way out, the chapel lights are on and the doors are wide open again. Turn everything off and practically run out the door. The next day I arrive at work, and the other mortician says, "So did Dave duck with you last night?" I ask what she's talking about. She explains that Dave was a mortician who used to work there. He literally had a heart attack while embalming a body one night and died there at the funeral home. She said he was known for playing pranks on people, and they had an ongoing joke that after he died, he still messed with everyone up there, which is also why she told me to turn the music up. It still creeps me out thinking about it. I worked at a summer camp for 2 summers, and over the years, quite a few people have reported paranormal activities happening from time to time. The camp was founded in the 1930s, and most of the buildings there ranged in age from that time to the 1960s. Several deaths have occurred on camp property during its existence. One of the most notable hauntings that is said to take place there is that of the founder. We'll call him Mr. H. He founded the camp after a paranormal experience himself. He was an amateur pilot, and he was flying lower than he thought due to foggy conditions, and his instrument panel had gone out. An illuminated cross appeared on the side of a mountain, giving him just enough time to pull up and avoid death. He figured out later where he was geographically and bought the property where the cross had appeared. He founded the camp there. He was very personally invested in the success of the camp, and he worked there until he died. He was known to be a hard worker and a strict, but caring, supervisor. Every Saturday, once the campers had departed, we had the responsibility of meticulously cleaning the entire camp to prepare it for the upcoming week's campers. We all tried to finish quickly and thoroughly so we could shower and dress nicely to go to a restaurant for dinner. However, we understood that we were expected to maintain a high standard of cleanliness. Our boss was pretty strict about us cleaning well, but there were also rumors that the founder's spirit would let us know if we were goofing off too much as well. The main lodge was always the part that took the longest. There was a central hub where the dining room, kitchen, and assembly hall were located, and then there were 5 wings built off of that where the campers would sleep during the week. Each wing had an external door on one end and a door that separated it from the hub on the other. Each of the interior doors was pretty difficult to open despite being clear glass because of pneumatic hinges, installed on each of them to prevent them from slamming and shattering. One day, a few of the guys were goofing off and were playing kick the can in one of the halls. All of a sudden, the door to the hub opened all the way, and then it slammed shut. There was nobody there. They would have seen it, as the door was clear. They said, "Sorry, Mr. H, we'll get back to work." At that point, the door gently swung open and closed slowly. They completed the hallways faster than usual and swiftly left the premises. I am a nurse, working mainly night shifts in a home for the elderly. There are 2 of us in the building at night, each has their floor, and there are 80 elderly in our home. Recently, we've had many palliative patients, patients awaiting death, and badly sick patients. We've also had a few deaths in the last month, as expected, of course. As of late, night shifts have become unbearable. Many of our patients scream throughout the night and barely get any sleep, ranting about seeing figures standing over them or talking to them, calling their names, and saying hello. Tonight, I was sitting in our little nurse point, in the dark, with my desk light turned on, overseeing halls in 3 directions, typing something into my computer. I heard a woman say hello to me. I looked up, everything was still and eerie. I went out and checked the halls, but I still found nothing. I brushed it off, maybe I was worn out. I sat back down. Not a minute passes and someone grabs my shoulder. I jump out of my skin. There was no one behind me, no one near me, and I nearly peed myself. I ran quickly down to my coworker. She was sitting pale in her nurse station, completely still. She looked at me and told me she had someone calling her name out of the death room. That's what we call the room where the dead are brought to await funeral services. She said she watched the door, which is tightly shut, slowly open, and then she heard the call. Needless to say, we're both scared to death, huddled in the common room, going out to rooms together. What should we do? Is there any way to calm things down? We're practically unable to work out of fear, and there are just too many people to tend to. Should we carry a cross with us? Light a candle? We're afraid, and we need help. Calling for help is useless, as they'll make fun of us if we do, so we're practically stuck. Please, help us out. I used to work in a nursing home as a teen to earn some extra cash. I started at 8 p.m., helped get everyone settled in for the night, and at 11 p.m. went to bed myself. I was the on-call help for the person doing the awake shift. So if they needed an extra set of hands, I'd be there, etc. One shift I was unwell. It turned out I had pneumonia, with a raging fever, so the other staff member sent me to bed early. Why she didn't send me home, I don't know. I woke in the night to find one of the residents sitting in the chair by my bed, sponging my head and singing to me. It was sweet. But I was very confused as to why she was there, as she'd been bedbound for months. I got up in the morning, she was gone. I dressed and dragged myself down to the office to let them know I was going straight to the doctor's and wouldn't be in the next night. I told them how this resident comforted me all night, to be met with horrified looks, as she had passed away just after I'd gone to bed. Okay, yikes. The workplace I'm at is haunted. The building is old and used to be an institution. Strange things keep happening there. Many of us have seen shadows in the hallways and in the department. Some have also seen shadows on the staircase. Once, there was a girl in unusual clothing who knocked on the window and smiled. The employee who saw her got scared and turned away for just a few seconds, and when she looked back, the girl was gone. She didn't see the girl leave the building or walk on the road either. Things also fall off shelves by themselves, like mittens. We've also heard what sounded like someone walking in the hallway, but when one of us went to check, no one was there. Today, I was upstairs in another department with 4 kids who were playing. All the other kids and employees were away on a trip, so they were far off. Suddenly, I heard a man say, "Hi." I turned around but couldn't see anyone. I didn't think much of it at first, but then something even stranger happened. One of the employees I was with took pictures of the kids playing and placed her phone on the table afterward. She went downstairs to get something, and when she came back up, the phone was gone. She searched everywhere for it and even tried calling it to hear the ringtone, but there was no sound, and the call went straight to voicemail, saying the user was unavailable. I also helped look for the phone, but we couldn't find it. Suddenly, the phone reappeared on the table, precisely where she had left it. She tried calling it again, and this time, it rang with sound immediately. Another strange occurrence recently involved a child who wanted wet wipes from a pack. He couldn't reach it because it was too far away. Suddenly, as the employee was watching, the pack of wet wipes slid over to the child all by itself. One late evening, about a decade ago, I responded silently to a call with additional units following me. The caller reported hearing footsteps on her second floor when she was in the kitchen. She lived alone, middle-aged, divorced, with no kids, and had no expected company. When we arrive, she is outside across the street, clearly unnerved and receiving comfort from her neighbor. Nearly simultaneously, other units arrived and established a perimeter around the property's corners. We talk with her and get permission to enter, so we decide we'll announce ourselves and clear the house. 3 of us stack up on the front door, announce, and make entry while the other officers are viewing the windows from a distance under concealment. She was in the midst of making a really late dinner, so the house smells really good. I remember how good it smelled. Anyway, we clear the ground level and make our way to the stairs when we hear it. Obviously footsteps on the wood floors above us. Not a panicky "oh shit, I'm caught" and running to hide or escape. No, these were calm, methodical, and almost pace-like. We announce ourselves again, and there is no response, except the pacing just starts to sort of fade away. Quietly I make my way up the steps, adrenaline pumping, and concentrating on pieing the corner at the top. I stop a few stairs shy of the corner, breathe, and proceed up. The hallway at the top was pitch black, and after successfully clearing the top/corner, we made our way down the hallway, clearing rooms. Nothing. Nobody. Not even a critter. Not that any critter would ever make what I describe as human footsteps on hardwood. After the initial search, a few of the other officers involved also checked every nook and cranny, bed, closet, and rack. Hell, even the washer, dryer, appliances, and cupboards were thoroughly searched. Nothing was out of order. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Eventually, we invite the lady back into her residence and reassure her that no one was inside. We suggest that the noise she heard might be due to wood shrinkage or expansion in the home. None of the officers outside, after our initial search, had seen anybody leave the top or bottom floors or windows. The house had no indications that anybody tried to force open a window or door. I stayed behind for about 30 minutes once the other officers cleared the call and waited while her friend showed up to stay the night with her. I went over basic security measures with her and double-checked that all her windows and doors were not compromised. She fed me well-done lasagna as I waited, and to this day, I'm convinced that I interacted with another dimension of life that day. Haunted/weird military base. Listening to some of these stories and experiences is bringing back so many memories of my first duty station. So I'm going to talk about that here. Grab your popcorn and get comfy. If you want more stories when I'm done, I have tons about this amazingly terrible experience. Lol. My first duty station, where I served as a military police officer, was Naval Station Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. I know, a rough gig for a 19-year-old kid. I was there from 2004 to 2007 and bounced between bases. Near the end of my time, I got reassigned to the Naval Magazine in Eva Beach and patrolled that base from early 2007 till I transferred in October, This base is comprised of the main magazine complex in Eva itself, the old base at Barber's Point in Kapolei, and another magazine complex in Nanakuli. For my first couple of months, as my welcome aboard and as the newest, most junior guy at the NavMag precinct, I got the lucky experience of patrolling the main mag area on night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. This area is approximately 7,000 acres of pitch-dark ammo magazines spread throughout the woods, the only light being from your headlights and overheads. Once you make your way to the gate of the mag area, I always have to park the truck, get out and walk to the gate, open it, drive through, and then get back out and lock the gate behind me. I always had the weirdest, creepiest feeling that I was being watched from the woods when I had to get out and open the gate. Mind you, to the left of the woods was an old abandoned base housing neighborhood that was closed down in the mid-1990s due to budget cuts and completely overgrown with vegetation. Because I worked the night shift, patrolling this large complex of row upon row of ammo magazines, intermixed with dense vegetation, was the scariest experience of my life. Normally I would just haul ass from the complex gate down to the piers where the only lights were located and move all my vehicle mirrors so that they faced inward and there was no way I could look in them, for fear of seeing something behind me. I absolutely hated making my rounds, and those 8 hours, from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., were the most dreaded feeling while I was assigned to mag patrol. There were times that radios would play music in the little shacks used by the day workers on the pier, maybe left on by the workers when they left, that I would shut off, and when I made my way back an hour or so later would be playing music again. Buildings that I would just speed past, because I swear to God that things were watching me from what was left of their windows. I never ever turned my lights off, those poor patrol vehicles. I always had my interior lights on, my high beams, my alley lights, and my takedowns on. I was a one-man light show spectacular. Some of the older DoD police would refuse to patrol the main mag complex because of stories that had been passed down over the years. The reason why they never used their mirrors was because of the story of a white dress woman who wandered the complex and would appear in your rearview mirror at random times, a practice I quickly adopted, turning my mirrors inward before heading out on patrol. And with total seriousness, I told my supervisor every evening that I was assigned to mag patrol, that if my vehicle ever broke down out there in those woods, in the pitch darkness, all alone with the only set of keys in and out, well, it was a pleasure working with him, because I wasn't going to sit in that dark and wait for help to arrive. I had a supernatural encounter while serving as a police officer in North London. This account is a true story. In late September 2020, I participated in a specific operation aimed at countering burglary and home invasion throughout North London. Due to the time of year, the autumn evenings gave criminals the perfect low-light environment to commit these types of crimes. It was day 4 of operation, redacted name, and multiple arrests had been made for various offenses between 1700 hours and 2100 hours. It was around 21:30 hours, and the shift was coming to a close when reports came out of a potential suspect on active burglary. With nearly every unit tied up, my colleagues and I decided we would deploy to the job. As with any call, I got the address from the control room, my operator stuck the address in maps, and off we went on blue lights. During our journey to the address, the control room operator had informed us that the caller knows the homeowners and said they are away on holiday, but awful screaming and smashing sounds could be heard from the property. This was a clear indicator of an active burglary or potentially a more serious offense. In light of this information, Mike and Delta, my colleagues, decided we would deploy tasers when approaching and clearing the property. Traffic in London even at this time of night was still light to medium. We arrived at the address in 8 minutes and informed the control room. It's now around 2145 hours. I've stopped the car outside the address, and we've proceeded to the front door. We shouted, "Police officers with tasers, make yourselves known." With no reply, Mike and Delta have decided they will enter the property through the front door, and I'll cut the suspects off round the back. Upon making this decision, we could hear what sounded like muffled screams or shouting from the 3rd floor of the house. This gave us, along with the reports, the legal right to force entry to the property to save life and limb. So we've hastily split up. I've gone around the driveway at the front of the house and kicked through a locked wooden side gate leading to the garden and rear portion of the house. It's absolutely pitch black at this point, so I've grabbed my torch in one hand whilst holding my taser in the other. As I've run down the side path and into the garden, I can see the flickers of my colleagues' torches as they're clearing the ground level through the sliding patio doors. In this instance, I've seen a soft light flicker on and off from the top floor porthole window. I've immediately informed my colleagues and requested more units over the radio. Mike and Delta have now moved to the stairs leading up to the 2nd floor, again shouting, "Police officers with tasers, make yourselves known." With this, an inhumane scream came from the top floor, This was a guttural scream, like an animal. It went through me like a knife, and again I shouted over the radio for more units. Mike and Delta rapidly swept past the second floor and ran up the stairs to the top bedroom. They kicked open the door to be met with complete fear. The room walls had been lined with old newspaper and pillows. Dried blood, excrement, and shoes littered the floor. The room was medium to large with sloped ceilings and an old fireplace. The room was without power, a light, or a person. Not a single suspect or victim of any kind was found in the property. With the arrival of other units and the drop of adrenaline, we could all settle and reflect on the job. No points of forced entry could be found. We then discovered that both Mike and Delta's body-worn camera, BWV, footage was corrupt or distorted. Mine was fine until the last moments when I walked in the property to join my colleagues at the front door, and none of our radios had transmitted audio. Mike and Delta were extremely competent police officers with a combined service of over 20 years. Whatever they experienced emotionally and spiritually changed them forever. The experience truly shook them. To this day I have no idea who or what was making those horrific screams, but a short while after this job had passed, both Mike and Delta resigned/were discharged/changed roles from stress or other medical implications. I too am no longer serving. Thank you for listening. I work in a DV shelter from 2:30 p.m. to midnight, but last week I worked the night shift from midnight to 10 a.m. During that time, I would see people walking around from my office. We have a window that faces the women's living area. I would also hear walking periodically, but the other person on shift would be asleep, and the only woman we have in the shelter is wheelchair bound. During the night shift, we do hourly walkthroughs to make sure everything is locked up and all doors are closed. When I'd hear the sounds, I'd do a quick walkthrough and see nothing, hear nothing. Tonight, I am on my regular shift with another person and ran to the bathroom, which is through 2 locked doors in the admin area, towards the back of the building. It's all lit with high-powered white LEDs. As I was in the restroom, I heard walking through the halls outside. I knew it wasn't my coworker, as every time a door opens, there's an announcement throughout the building so us advocates know about it. I stepped out of the bathroom and immediately felt a sense of dread. I ran back to the advocate office and spoke to my coworker, and she said things like this happen all the time. Apparently people hear knocking and female voices from the men's wing, which is completely opposite from the women's wing and through more locked doors. 3 different people saw a chair fly across the room. I asked my coworker to show me the hallway in the women's wing with all the bad energy and crazy things. I started less than a month ago, so we started to walk there. One of the signs that's been hanging up since she started in September, with a thumbtack, fell before we even got to it, and then a door opened in the hallway. Our client is currently not at the shelter, so nobody would be back there, especially since every other employee that was here left at 6 p.m. We peeked down, and nothing was open, no movement under the client's door, nothing. I'm mostly curious if there are any other explanations for all these things. I've heard some knocking, footsteps, doors opening, and figures out of the corner of my eye, but I don't want to claim paranormal if there's something else going on. I'm not an expert on these things either. I'm kind of freaking out about it since I'm on evening shift all through December, and then I'm by myself starting in January. I worked at the Naval Hospital in Camp Pendleton in 2013. I was part of the transition team that moved the last of the belongings that they wanted from their old location to their new one. Along with others on my team, we were part of the final sweep as far as cleaning up, waxing the floors, and locking up some of the higher level rooms within the old hospital. It was a nice gig because there were a ton of office supplies that were going to just get thrown away along with some office chairs. I like to draw, so I took home 2 chairs, one for me and one for my roommate, along with a plethora of pens and paper. In my duty section, there was also the security role of watching over the barracks, which were just outside the hospital. With the Navy being the Navy, they didn't transfer anyone over to the new barracks until about a full 8 months after the move to the new hospital. So someone still had to stand duty there as well as patrol the old hospital to keep away any would-be vandals from a place they thought was completely abandoned. Of course I would end up getting duty one day and would start getting people coming into the commons area telling me to go look at the hospital. A light was clearly visible on either the 6th or 7th floor, where a figure stood motionless, watching outside. I put up a sign to say that I would be leaving the office and to call my personal number should they need anything. Usually it was just to reset their key cards, but each room had 4 rooms within it, so typically people just called their roommates to open the doors instead of waiting for the process of me resetting their key card. It was already pretty late at night, so I wasn't worried about it. I would go to the hospital, and it was still completely locked all around. I checked to make sure that no windows were ajar, but the hospital didn't have any that opened. I even tried to lift the back hatch that linens and new supplies came through by truck, and that was still secured. I had no other way of getting in myself, so when my chief came down around 2 a.m., as they seldomly did but were required to at least once a night, I made a report of it. By this time the figure was gone, but the light remained on. I was never told if they ever found anyone or if it was even followed up on for that matter. But it was one of the creepiest things I remember from being there. Odd experience while alone at work. I work in an elementary school in a fairly rural part of Alaska. Like everywhere else, we have implemented work from home policies for all teachers. I'm working in an administrative type position right now, though, and was supposed to record which stacks of paperwork teachers left for students still need to be delivered, then call the parents and arrange a drop-off. Because of the time of day and because of social distancing, I was alone in the building. Even the janitor wasn't present. Now this isn't the first time I've been alone in the gym. I was a long-term sub for the PE teacher and spent maybe 4 months in the role, but it is the first time I was the only person in the entire building. Today I was moving stacks in the gym, sorting by family, when the door to the PE equipment closet started to shake. It sounded like someone was leaning against it and trying to push it open. I thought at first it was air pressure from a vent or something, but I've worked in the gym a lot, and it's never happened before. I walked over to investigate, and then the door popped open. It was a bit weird, but I figured maybe it was some kind of airflow issue and maybe it had not been latched the whole way. I checked to make sure nobody was hiding in the closet and resecured it, taking my time to lock it so it couldn't pop back open. I got back to work, picked up a stack to move, and the door flew open again, this time more violently. It banged against the wall. I'll admit I was getting a bit creeped out. The door has never caused me trouble like that before, and I want to emphasize that I have been the PE substitute teacher many times. I even coached an after-school sport in the gym. I checked to make sure nothing was leaning on it, it was fully latched, there was nothing in the hinges, and secured it again. I finished my task and started walking to turn off the lights and resecure the building. Right as I reached for the light switch, the door flew open again. I admit, I fled. Instead of staying to make phone calls in the office, I locked down the building and left. After I got home, I was telling my mother, a former teacher in the building, about the experience. She laughed and told me it was Mr. Chris, an old PE teacher who used to work in the building. Apparently when he was alive, he would sometimes hide in the closet and startle her when she was working as the track coach. She thinks our resemblance just caused her old friend to want to say hello. Real experiences I've had while working as a nurse. In my mid-20s I worked at a subacute rehab facility. Generally, these places exist to help those who are struggling after an accident, surgery, etc. regain their mobility and quality of life with the help of physical therapy and round-the-clock nursing care. I worked in the dementia unit. These patients were long-term, and most ended up living out the rest of their days there. Although it was called the dementia unit, our patients were comprised of those suffering from permanent or long-term brain-related conditions. These included dementia/Alzheimer's, comas, strokes, traumatic brain injuries, and brain tumors. These are the experiences I had while working there. 1. A disembodied hand. I had just clocked in for the evening and received a report from the day shift nurse. I was standing at the end of the hallway with my back against the wall, reviewing the notes I had taken from the previous nurse. While reading over my slip of paper, I felt something that could only be described as a hand dragging its fingers horizontally across my abdomen. I jerked back and looked around, but I was completely alone. 2. The call light symphony. Although I do not have a particular story about call lights, it was a normal occurrence to have them triggered in empty rooms. This occurred even in rooms where the wires connected to the call button were unplugged from the wall. Some nights the nurses would be forced to respond to several phantom calls from empty rooms. 3. The empty room ghost. At the very end of one of our halls was a habitually empty room. The heat/air conditioning unit was broken, so patients were never placed there. The nurses and aides would use that room for privacy during personal phone calls, to poop in peace, or to do whatever else required some seclusion. One evening I headed into that room's bathroom to touch up my makeup and fix my hair. I left the bathroom door slightly ajar while going about my business. I was putting my hair up in a bun when the bathroom door slammed shut behind me. Mid-heart attack, I spun around and jerked the door back open. The room was empty. The time it would have taken a human to exit the room would have been longer than what it took me to open the bathroom door. I'd also like to note that there was no furniture in the room, nothing a human could have hidden behind. I'm convinced it wasn't a living person who slammed that door. 4. The last farewell. One patient we had residing in the long-term unit was a middle-aged woman with severe Down syndrome. She was mostly nonverbal save for a few words she would utter randomly. She was very sweet and always had a smile on her face. It was my turn to help her eat dinner the night this story takes place. She didn't have the motor skills to eat properly, so I spoon-fed her while we caught up on cartoons on her TV set. However, on this specific night, she behaved in an unexpected manner. I didn't notice at first because I was engrossed in the show we were watching. I failed to notice her attempts to get my attention. She finally resorted to using grunts to call me away from the TV screen. When I did finally notice, she seemed overjoyed with something. Her mouth was stretched into a wide grin, and she was pointing at an empty corner in the back of her room. I could clearly see the corner but nothing else. I looked back and forth between her and the corner but couldn't understand what she was trying to communicate. She was pointing, giggling, and waving at apparently nothing in the corner. I tried asking her what she was trying to show me, simple yes and no questions she could nod or shake her head at. I became uneasy with her actions because I knew she was seeing something I could not. Once I completed feeding her, I walked back to the hallway, where a fellow nurse immediately approached me. My stomach sank, and I felt queasy while she told me the next door neighbor of the woman I was just feeding had passed away during dinner time. 5. The window watcher. A fellow nurse told me this story, not mine. My friend, let's call her Mary, not her real name, worked the night shift at the same rehab as I, but this story takes place years before I was hired there. Mary had a close relationship with one of her patients, and she made an effort to make her feel special. The patient was an elderly woman with no living family and was chronically lonely. Let's call the patient Emily. When Mary bonded with Emily, it became a habit of Emily's to wait by her room's window, which faced the employee parking lot, so when she saw Mary walking up to the building, she could wave. The event became a special occasion for Emily, and the two would wave to one another before and after Mary's shift while she traveled to and from the employee parking lot. Then Emily fell ill and was unable to get out of bed for a while. Every time Mary pulled up for work, she would check to see if Emily was waiting by the window. When she didn't see her, she would know, walking in, that Emily was still sick. This routine went on for a few weeks. Mary would pull into the parking lot, hoping to see her sweet patient up and out of bed and waiting patiently to wave to her. But then one day Mary showed up at work and saw Emily standing at her window, peering out over the employee parking lot. Mary was thrilled and hopped out of her car and gave Emily a gleeful wave. But Emily stood motionless and did not react to Mary's exuberant greeting. Puzzled, Mary headed into the building only to quickly find out Emily passed away earlier that day. I hope you enjoyed listening to these stories as much as I enjoy sharing them. I work in a hospital. I think I saw a ghost. I was wheeling a trolley full of paperwork down the hallway when I saw a woman standing in it. There was no one else around, very rare, and the second I saw her I got goosebumps on my arms. She wasn't moving, she didn't look like she was lost, she was just standing there looking at nothing, I guess. There was just a wall there. We made eye contact as I walked past her, and I swear I felt heat leaving my body, that's the best way I can explain it. I heard the sound of shuffling behind me, and when I looked back, I saw her moving very slowly to follow me in the direction I had gone. I said to myself I'd ask her if she was okay after I dropped off the paperwork to the office, which was right around the corner from the hallway I saw her in. Here's the thing, I came back out of the office 30 seconds after I saw that woman, and she was nowhere to be found. There was nowhere she could have gone in that short amount of time, especially considering how slowly I saw her walking. She would have only made it a few meters in the time it took me to go in the office and come back out. I saw a nurse in that corridor on my way back and asked her if she saw the woman. She said no, and she said she didn't see anyone matching her description. The corridor didn't feel cold anymore as I made my way back, and I haven't seen that woman in the hours since. My coworkers think I just imagined her, but the goosebumps and the cold sinking feeling when we made eye contact were real. I think a hospital of all places would be where you'd see a ghost. I've been working here for a year, but this was the first experience I had that made me think, shit, was that really a ghost? I have no explanation for this. There was nowhere that woman could have gone where I wouldn't have seen her, especially at the speed she was going. This happened hours ago, but I'm still spooked. Graveyard security guard. I recently started a job as a security guard for the graveyard shift. The building has 12 floors, roof access, and 2 parking garages for reference. Only my partner and I have the authority to stay in the building overnight. Also, you need a key card to use the elevator or get in the doors to the stairwell. Anyway, the first night, one of the motion-activated toilets went off when no one was near it. We had to do a bathroom patrol. It happened right when we opened the door on a vacant floor. A week ago I was doing a patrol from the 12th floor mechanical room. As I exited the room and made my way to the stairwell, I heard a rattle and a slight bang from the rooftop door. I ran up there, and there was nothing. I assumed it was a bird or something. I started my way down, and then the 11th floor door started jiggling. I jogged my way down because it's my job and I had to go there anyway. I swipe my key, and there's no one yet again. Then it was quiet besides toilets and walkie-talkies going off when we weren't touching them. Last night I was doing bathroom patrol at 4 a.m., listening to my music in one ear. I get to the 11th floor to start, and I hear footsteps behind me. I pull out the headphone while turning around, getting ready to tell them to get out. Yet again no one, but right as those footsteps stopped, there were heavy footsteps on the floor above me, but then they stopped right above me when I figured out where they were coming from. After I got out of that floor into the stairwell and shut the door, I heard it sound like it was trying to open but wasn't moving. There isn't any wind inside the building, and nothing showed up on security cameras. I might try to record tonight. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to do that or not, though. I'll have to ask. Wild experience at work, an entity mimicking someone's appearance? For context, I work the night shift as a home health aide. I've worked in the same house and with the same woman for 4 years, and nothing major has ever happened before now. I've seen movement/shadows out of the corner of my eye before, but nothing all that interesting to talk about. Now for what happened last night. As I walked from the kitchen into the living room, I caught a glimpse of what I believe to be the woman I care for standing at the bathroom door, situated in a hallway that connects to her bedroom. When I looked at her fully, she was standing in the doorway, half in the bathroom and half in the hall, just staring at me. I made eye contact with her for a few seconds, long enough to wonder what she was doing, then it was like she shifted/sidestepped into the bathroom. She never stopped facing/staring at me. The hall and bathroom lights were off, so it didn't seem odd to me at first. She was just being a little quirky. I was so convinced that it was her, I even called for her to turn the bathroom light on so she could see what she was doing, and when the light never came on, I went in to check on her, and of course, she wasn't there. I checked for her in her bedroom, and she was fully asleep, and there was no way for her to have gone from the bathroom to her room without me seeing her, since it's down and across that same hallway. The weirdest part to me, thinking back on it, is that as soon as we broke eye contact, my vision got blurry. It went in and out of focus for a few seconds, long enough to freak me out a little. I had to blink hard to get my eyes working again. At that point, I fully believed it was just her going to the bathroom, so at the time it seemed like I was just having a problem with my eyes, but now it freaks me out even more. Whatever it was looked exactly like her. I didn't even question it until I saw that the bathroom was empty. I'm usually quick to explain this kind of thing away, but this time I can't. Something happened to me at work. This story happened to me back in 2020 before the pandemic started. I had been working as a FedEx delivery driver for about a year at this point. At the time I had been given a bigger area, one that included the downtown area of the city I lived in. Like many cities, our downtown area was not the best place to be day or night. For me it was just another day, and growing up near the area, I was no stranger to the area or the rough environment that I was working in. Because of that, not a lot would freak me out, as I had dealt with shootings, homeless people, and the pretty frequent drug addicts. On the day this event happened, it was just another day for me, or so I thought it was. I had made good time, as I had been really familiar with my area. I had been given a package for a church on a busy main street that I had never been to before. I knew where it was, and I also knew it was near a lot of homeless camps. This is an important detail, as it will explain some of my actions. I made my way there around 2 p.m., knowing that once I was done with this street, I would have to shoot across town to do my pickups for the day and then head home. As I reached the church, I locked up my truck and grabbed the package to enter the church. Now something of note here, I am not a very religious person, was force-fed religion my whole life, and going to churches was not really my thing, but it's work I had to do. Anyways, as I walked up to the church, I noticed that the big, huge double doors were wide open. At the time I didn't think this was strange, as it was a poor area and it was a church. Maybe they had opened the doors to allow people to come in for aid. I made my way inside and was greeted by a giant mirror from the floor to the ceiling and 2 more doors leading into the service area. I yelled out, announcing I was FedEx and that I had a package for them. Typically I did this to avoid scaring anyone or freaking anyone out when I would walk into them. As I got no response, I decided I would walk around looking for someone. To my left was a small entryway, and I realized that it was the bathrooms. To my right was a dark hallway that I could see made a left at the end of it. I decided to go that way, as I figured that was where the offices might be and I could run into someone. I continued down the hallway, still yelling out that I was FedEx and that I had a package that needed to be signed for. As I made the left turn, the hallway became even darker. I began to feel a sense of danger but played it off because of the dark. As I went on, I noticed a little light coming from the end of the hallway to the right. As I made my way through the door with the light shining from underneath, I entered a courtyard with a bunch of dried up flowers that was not very well taken care of. At this point across from me was another building that I figured maybe the staff was in there, so I decided to check it out. When I opened the door, I noticed it was pitch black inside. I yelled out a few more times to make my presence known and made my way inside. As the door closed behind me, I realized it had become pitch black inside, and I pulled out my cell phone to use as a flashlight. Straight ahead of me was a fire exit, and I noticed another hallway on the left. As I made my way there with my dim little light, I called out again. This time I was greeted by some slamming of some doors. Instantly my body tensed up, and the fear that was building up was reaching an all-time high. I decided that if there was somebody in here and they heard me, they could come find me in the front of my truck. I also knew that with the doors as wide open as they were, I could be walking into a homeless person or, worse, waiting for me in the dark. At this point I began making my way back outside into the courtyard and back into the main part of the church. Freaked out, I remember making my way down the hallway and into the main part of the building. I felt heavy, and a wave of sorrow came over me. I felt as if something had grabbed my shoulders, and I felt like I was trying to walk through a swamp. The last thing I remember was a sense of dread coming over me. The next thing I remember, I was back in my truck about half a mile away from the church in a random neighborhood. The package I had was in the seat next to me, and I was covered in sweat and crying. I am not a super emotional person, and crying is not something I do very often. I felt terrible, as if everything around me was hopeless and meaningless. When I checked my phone, I noticed that it was almost 3 p.m. and I had lost an hour of time. Not knowing what to do, I called my girlfriend and my best friend because I was freaking out and didn't know what had happened to me. To this day I refuse to go inside that church even if it would cause me to get in trouble. To this day I still feel really uneasy about that place, and even though I have moved away from that city, I find myself thinking about it more often than I feel like I should. I have experienced other events in the past, but nothing like this, and those events feel like they had some way of being explained. This, however, I have no explanation for. I am still not sure how I got to my truck and managed to drive half a mile away and not remember a thing about it. Has anyone else experienced time loss events like this or have any idea what exactly I experienced? I was walking near one of the apartment buildings at the retirement village where I work. I got a call on the radio from the gate guard. There is a black bear on the property. And you want me to do what with this bear? Was my reply over the radio. I was joking, as we get bears all of the time cutting through the property to get to the Publix dumpster. So I drove our gasoline-powered golf cart to the area where the bear was sighted. I know the bears don't like the sound of the golf cart. So I was just driving around in an attempt to scare it off if it still was around. After a few passes, I was confident that the bear had vanished. However, I still had to put on a show for any resident or guest that may be watching. So, I got off the golf cart and started walking around, shining my flashlight around. I end up in the backyard where the bear was reported. Shine my flashlight around. Nothing. Good. I turn around, and the community alcoholic comes out his back door. Did you see it? Did you see it? He asks. No, sir. It must have kept going after you saw it. I answered. No. No, he exclaimed, I saw the bear, and then I saw you. Now only is this coming from an 80-year-old who drinks all day, but it is now 10 o'clock at night. But he is also legally blind. So I am thinking to myself that he saw me and thought I was a bear but couldn't figure out how the bear was shining a flashlight all over the place. Then he realized it was me. Well, sir, there is no bear here now. As I continue to shine my flashlight around for good measure. Let me get you back into your house, sir. I grab his left arm to guide the blind old man back into his house. Suddenly, the bear pops out behind some bushes that line the back wall of his house. Whoa, sir, the bear is right in front of us. Now remember the part where I said this resident was legally blind? Where? Where? I don't see any bear, as he starts pulling me right towards the bear. Oh, now the blind man doesn't see the bear 30 feet in front of us. My instincts tell me to run. But I am a security officer. I can't let this bear eat one of my residents. I'll never work security again if I bail right now. Sir, please stop. The bear is right in front of us. The bear starts grunting at us and pouncing on its front paws. I think this is where I die. Finally, the old man sees the bear and starts yelling at it and waving his arms. A flashback of when I was a kid watching Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom and how smaller animals would group together to make themselves look bigger to a predator. So I stood next to the resident, waving my own arms and yelling while still thinking I was about to die. The bear took one look at us fools and took off running for the woods. That night, I seriously considered quitting. Since then I have learned that black bears are nothing but bullies and seldom attack. I have had many encounters with bears since then, both at work, while hiking, and in my backyard. I have learned to stand my ground with them. I now love my bears as much as my residents. I was doing a night shift with a new grad, orienting her to the night shift. We were alone in the department, and when I had started my shift, I had done my usual routine of checking/locking every door except for the one I'd bring patients through. There was no way for someone to enter the department without me seeing them walk past me. It was a quiet night, and at like 3 a.m., I and the new grad were sitting just chatting when we both heard an elderly voice say, "Hello? Help me." The voice sounded a bit far away, like down the hall in one of the exam rooms. Made my hair stand on end. We both looked at each other and asked if we had both heard the same thing. We went together and double-checked all the rooms in the department, but no one was there, and all the doors were still locked. I don't know how wise it is to explain it besides it being paranormal, especially since we have both heard it. There weren't any ER or inpatient rooms nearby where sound could have carried from either. The area we heard the voice from had always given me weird vibes. Another hospital I worked at had a ghost that was caught on camera. He's in the reflection of a dark computer screen. He was tall, elderly, and in a gown and housecoat. The creepy part was his eyes just looked like black pits. This is an experience I had a few years ago at one of my old workplaces. Just thought it'd be an interesting one for people here. I am an engineering technologist. When I first graduated from college, I got a job working for the college as a robotics research specialist. Generally, this meant I was working with collaborative robots and programming their behavior and vision systems. One of the robots I was working with was an autonomous platform that used a Kinect as a vision system that connected directly to a laptop to see and analyze its data input. The system was more or less clean. It pretty much only showed you what it could recognize as a human based on a previous coding project as well as normal light vision that you would see from any old camera. The college I worked in is an older building in my city. Not historic, but it's part of the oldest area on the campus. The department I worked for wasn't located here, but the robot I was working on was. The robot had been stashed for years in a mezzanine office right over the college's machining shop. This office honestly just had a really weird vibe as a whole. It was small, a little musty and dusty since nobody had worked there for years, and cramped. It felt strange to work there, as if you had traveled back in time to the mid-2000s and settled down on the dusty carpet. It had been so abruptly abandoned that when I was exploring the closet, I literally found a can of soup that expired 10 years beforehand. While I was up here, fixing up that robot, I'd turned it on to check the quality of the video stream. I was testing to see how well it would track a person without getting distracted. So I stood in front of it, hopped up and down a couple of times to grab its attention, and started walking around the room to test its tracking. Suddenly, it stops tracking me in the middle of testing and turns to stare at a blank space directly in front of it. I run in front of it, start hopping up and down again, and nothing. The robot just completely refuses to track me. It's absolutely fixated on that blank space. I check the laptop, and there's a stick figure showing what the camera was tracking, and I'm just desperately wiping the camera lens to get it to stop tracking nothing. No changes, and eventually, I just give up for the day, figuring that the stick figure is probably just a weird visual glitch and it'll have fixed itself by the next day. The next day, I boot up the robot again and set it up. I don't even bother trying to get it to track me yet, I'm just going through the code on the laptop. While I'm doing this, the robot suddenly plays its found you sound and wrenches itself out of my hands to stare at the wall and window behind my back. On the screen, I can see two stick figures. One of them is clearly posed like somebody casually leaning against the wall. The other one is posed like it has its arms and chin resting on the windowsill. This windowsill is 20 feet off the ground, over machinery, with no actual way to reach it from the outside. I turn around to look behind me to see what the robot could even possibly be tracking at this point, and as I do so, the robot goes, "Oh, you're gone." The robot dismisses both stick figures from its display. There's nothing behind me and nothing outside the window that could have made those shapes. What could the robot have been tracking? I genuinely have no idea, and it spooked me badly enough that I refused to go into that room by myself after that. In the 1980s, I worked the night shift as a park ranger in a state park located on the ocean in Connecticut. During the summer there was an overnight summer camp in operation for physically and mentally challenged kids and adults, so there were people around, but in the spring and fall I was usually the only person in the park at night. One night in late September I was making a last run-through around 3 a.m. before going home for the night. Fog rolling in and foghorns blowing in the distance. I came around the final turn by the beach, and there was a rabbit lying in the middle of the road with its head sliced clean off. It didn't look like the sort of thing a predator would have done, and there were no coyotes in that part of Connecticut back then anyway. I got out of the truck with a flashlight to check it out and then decided to nope out of there. Another time late at night I found a van parked down at the beach but couldn't find the owners. I called the park ranger from next door, and he came over to help us look around, but we couldn't find anyone. Apparently the head ranger, who lived on premises next door, heard us talking about it on the radio, so he came over too. I walked over to the town beach on the other side and saw two huge dudes in scuba gear walking out of the surf carrying bags that they hastily dropped in the ocean when we lit them up. So it seemed we'd found ourselves some guys poaching lobster traps. Or whatever it was something fishy. Who the duck goes scuba diving in the dark in Long Island Sound. Fortunately Ranger Ted was armed, and there were 3 of us and only 2 of them. Small comfort, though, as I recall both dudes being like 6 feet 4 inches and built like brick shithouses, standing there giving us the stink eye. It was late, so we just told them to get lost. Creepy experiences at a resident facility. I worked as an LNA, licensed nursing assistant, for this nice resident facility in Concord, NH. In my first year, due to a shortage of staff, I volunteered to work a night shift after a long day shift. After all the residents went to bed, all the LNAs gathered in the floor lounge to get our books done and up to date. We were in there for quite a while when a light went off at the end of the hall. Knowing this resident most likely needed the restroom, I rushed to her side. When I entered, I saw a black floating mist above her. She was hysterical, pointing to the mist and saying it was here to get her. I am not a religious person, but I wanted to calm her, and I knew I could not acknowledge the mist above her. It is not unusual for these kinds of strange things to happen in these types of facilities. I turned off the light and held her hand. We prayed. The mist vanished. I calmed her down and stayed with her until she went back to sleep. I crept out of her room and went back to the lounge. I reported what I saw to the others, but we cannot report it in our books. I found out that this mist had been seen in several rooms on the night shift for weeks. Another experience, I was working with a night shift LNA who volunteered to work the day shift on my floor. I was friends with him outside of work, as we were both writers. It was getting to the end of our shift, and we had brought our residents to the bathroom and readied them for activities that took place in the basement, where most of the administration was located. The other LNA and I brought our last residents to the activity and were walking back to the elevator. We were not walking the stairs even though it was just one flight up. It was a long day. We saw someone walk out of the bathroom ahead of us and go around the corner to the elevator. I holler, "Hold that elevator." We were only seconds behind. We turned the corner, but no one was there. The other LNA and I just looked at each other. There was no place that this person could have gone. It was a dead end. I asked if I was going crazy. "Did you see that person?" The other LNA agreed. "Where did they go?" At this time of day, the elevators took a long time to travel between floors due to the large number of visitors and the change of shifts. The elevators would take longer to get back down to the basement. One of our residents turned 100 years old, and she had called me in to read a letter she received from the President of the United States, George W. Bush Jr., at the time. I had a few days off from work. When I returned, I had heard the awful news that she left us in her sleep. The nurse on duty on that floor in our staff meeting read a note that her alarm light kept going off. Just then, the panel showed a light going off in that room. I thought it was the roommate. I volunteered to see what she needed. Upon entering the room, I found the roommate absent. The light was coming from the empty bed of the resident who had passed. I shut it off, thinking it was a fluke. After that, it seemed to keep going off minutes after you shut it off. I volunteered to go to the empty top floor, where we kept the extra supplies, to get a new plug. I came back down and replaced the plug. Before I left the room, the light went off again. I removed the plug but forgot the failsafe. If you remove the plug for any length of time, the light will go off. Just then, I asked the nurse, "Did anyone leave the window open after she passed?" The nurse looked at the note. "Nope, no one did that. It is not unusual that after a passing in a residential facility, you open the window. It is the belief that it allows the spirit of the deceased to escape." I reattached the plug and opened the window. At the end of my shift, I closed it. The light never went off for the rest of my shift after I opened the window. The next day there were no reports of that light going off. Yes. It stays with me to this day. I was hired as an overnight resident counselor. The house was a large brownstone, very old but kept in good condition. I noticed that when I went in for the first shift, other coworkers looked at me like, "Good luck." I happened to be doing the client's laundry, the machines were off the kitchen. I walked out to the kitchen table and out of the corner of my eye saw a very large full-bodied man dressed in an orange jumpsuit. It scared the shit out of me. He just nodded his head and disappeared. The next shift I walked into the front parlor at the same time, 4 a.m. I saw a well-dressed older man with a briefcase floating down the stairs. When he saw me, he looked as scared as I was. And disappeared. Saw a few more until I decided I would ask our nurse and manager. When I told them the above, they looked at me, and the nurse asked if I knew what the house was prior to being the home for our clients. I said no. The manager told me that she has had extreme difficulty keeping staff because the house was a former funeral home. Additionally, an overnight worker was murdered. Her ex-boyfriend came to the house and wanted to talk to her. She let him in, he ended her and dumped her across the street in a wooded area. The man in the orange jumpsuit was her boyfriend in his prison jumpsuit. The other men were owners of the funeral home. That bastard attached himself to me, and I brought him home with me. My older daughter, 8 years old, saw him in our living room. I yelled to him to leave and never come back. Saged the house and did assault ritual. I asked for a transfer to another group home. The incident happened in Cohoes, New York. Mohawk Street murder. Never went back to the house. Unexplainable scream during my night shift. So, this happened about 7 years ago, but I still think about it every so often. Back then, I worked as a security guard, the type of security guard that travels around the city to do these routine checks on objects. You know, making sure that doors, windows, gates, etc., are locked properly, that no people are on the property, checking for fire hazards, attending SOS/robbery alarms, and so on. There is this mall in the city, and per our contract, we did 2 security walks in the mall. The first walkthrough occurred when the mall closed, during which we emptied the mall of customers, locked all doors and entrances, and checked all alarm systems. We end the first round by making sure the mall is empty of both customers and employees, checking surveillance, and turning on all the alarms. The second walkthrough usually took place many hours later in the middle of the night, where we made sure all the entrances were indeed locked but also took another sweep inside to check for people and so on. This particular evening, the first security walkthrough went by without any issues, just the usual few customers taking forever to get out. The second walkthrough, however, something really weird happened. I started off by walking around the mall, making sure nothing is out of the ordinary and that everything is locked. I step inside and check the alarm monitoring, where everything is turned on, with no error codes or logs of people being within after I left the mall my first time for the shift. I go to the top floor and work my way down each floor, everything is looking good. Eventually, I reach the cellar floor, which has a toy store on one side and a huge playroom directly opposite it. Both the playroom and toy store have this see-through glass wall separating them from the hallway in the middle. Anyways, I got down there and did my usual walkthrough of the cellar. The toy store had this sticker on the door saying something about collectibles 50% off or something. I walk up to the glass door and shine my flashlight toward the collectibles section. As I'm focusing on the collectibles, I hear this sudden loud scream behind me, and I mean really loud, like I wanted to cover my ears. The scream sounded like a little girl, and it screamed "Mommy." But with a sort of rasp and desperate tone to it. Like a death scream, if that's a way to describe it. I quickly turn around and freeze in place whilst shining my maglite in the hallway and into the playroom. I just stand there for a solid 10 to 15 seconds trying to see who screamed. After collecting myself, I immediately think that somehow a little girl must have been left in the playroom when the mall closed, so I run into the playroom and start looking through all the toys and plushies, but no girl was found. I then double-checked every little surface in the cellar, but no one was there. I began to think that my colleague, who ended his shift many hours ago, is playing a prank on me, so I go back upstairs to the alarm/surveillance monitoring, but again there are no logs of anyone but me entering different zones/using the keycard. I then check the surveillance, but there's no one but me on all the cameras. I also started to chuckle at myself as I thought I looked like a coward when it happened. I settle my mind on it being some sort of doll in the toy store with a broken voice box or something, but it's weird that the scream came from behind me in the hall/playroom. I leave. I visit the store the next day and ask about the doll that screams, but they don't have any dolls with any kind of voice box. They clean the playroom every morning, and if they find toys that aren't theirs, they list them and put them in a box. There were no dolls in sight. I also asked if they had baby monitors for sale, but they did not. I'm very skeptical by nature and absolutely do not believe in ghosts and will always find a natural/logical, non-supernatural explanation when stuff like that happens, but what happened during that night shift I just can't explain. I have a few experiences that are more intense than this one, but those occurred outside of my work environment. I've only got one work-related one, so I'll share that. At uni, I used to work in a writing lab as a tutor. The English building was formerly the hospital for the area, and when a larger hospital was built on the other side of town, the university decided to buy the old hospital and convert it. There were still remnants of the morgue in the basement, as well as filing cabinets full of old patient files from the 50s and 60s that were forgotten and had never made their way to the new building. I often opened the lab before classes started. One day, I had opened the lab and was sitting on the computer getting some coursework done when I heard singing. There weren't words, but I could quite clearly hear a female voice singing a melody, and it was coming from the hallway outside of the lab. I got up and peered outside of the door. The hallway was short enough that you could see either end of it from any room along it, and the lab was located at the top of the stairs, which were constructed in such a way that you could look down into the floor below. There was no one, and the singing had stopped the moment I poked my head outside. I sat back down and went back to my coursework, and within a couple of minutes the singing started again. Same voice, same melody, only it was louder this time. I got up and walked up and down the hallway, checking all of the classroom doors. They were all locked, and the lights were off. No one was in any of the rooms upstairs. I went down the stairwell and looked around the ground floor. Again, all dark, doors shut and locked. The hall lights weren't even on down there, and it was clear that no one else was in the building. The singing had stopped once again as soon as I'd set foot outside of the lab. I went back up to the lab, and the singing started again. This time, I just sat in the lab, and it eventually faded away after several minutes. While it wasn't the most terrifying or peculiar experience I've ever encountered, it was the only one that occurred in a professional environment. Night shift campus security. I work as a campus security officer at a well-known college in good old South Carolina. The job is without a doubt the best I've ever had. Beautiful campus, supportive, cooperative students, friendly staff. All in all, with the exception of the occasional emergency or difficult traffic stop, it's really laid back, especially for a law enforcement job. Working for a college campus is kind of like being a town guard in Skyrim. You have your own borders to patrol, your own little town. And you know everyone, and everyone knows you. Nothing but petty thievery and drunken brawls. And certainly, no bandit raids. It has a small town feel to it, and I love it. But like any small town, it has its fair share of local haunted buildings and supernatural happenings. At first, one can disregard such talk as crazy or the students having overactive imaginations. I'm of college age, so I understand where they're coming from. Having a haunted building on campus would be wicked cool, and if you really want something to be haunted, you'll make it so with your mind alone. Next thing you know, your experiences with the paranormal spread out among the rest of the student body, starting with rumors at the CAF, then more rumors of other people's experiences, and yada yada. Eventually, boom. The place is haunted. It wasn't until I started working third shift that I realized some of these stories may be true. As you can imagine, we have a rather large lockup list to attend to at the end of every day. About 40 buildings, each with hundreds of rooms to check. So it takes a while. Anyway, I was with my partner, and we were clearing one of the larger, central buildings on campus. Our campus has a curfew during the week for security purposes, so as you can imagine, students get pretty creative when it comes to hiding places. Thus, we had to learn them all by checking every nook and cranny in every single room in every single building, or else we could be reprimanded. We finished up, having triple-checked every room. The building was empty. We double-checked every single perimeter door, and the lockup was complete. No cars were in the parking lot, and no students were anywhere nearby. We called into dispatch that the lockup was finished and moved on to the next building. After lockup, I got in my patrol car and drove around as per usual, checking up on everything and making sure no one was sneaking around after curfew doing drugs or whatnot. Just campo things. I got a call from dispatch that said the perimeter alarm for the central building was going off. Cue blue lights, and I meet my partner on scene. We then have to begin the painstaking process of clearing every single room on every floor all over again. When we got there, the door was open, but no one was there. We couldn't figure out who had triggered the alarm, so we figured it was a teacher who had just forgotten something in their office. The downstairs doors were still locked, so we unlocked them to go check the rooms that lined the halls below us. 4 hallways make up the downstairs in a basic, square bottom floor shape. Each stretched about 50 yards or so, and each was dimly lit by emergency lighting. We cleared them one by one until we got to the last hallway. There, at the end, in the very middle of the dark hallway, was a single desk facing us. This desk had seemingly come from nowhere. Each classroom cannot be opened without a key once it's locked, and once they're cleared, they're immediately locked down. None of the downstairs doors had been open. It is 100% safe to say no one had been in there. We looked at each other and slowly approached the desk. We triple-checked each classroom, but there's just no way someone could have hidden in there and waited for us to leave to do this. The desk was staring at us. And I know that doesn't make sense. But the desk seemed to be almost occupied. And even though it was empty, I felt as if we were being watched as we approached, the eerie feeling growing stronger the closer we got. As we passed the desk, the feeling went away. Admittedly, we, two fully armed, trained, and equipped officers, quickly left the building after we locked it again, both of us very unsettled. About 30 minutes pass. I'm on patrol again, and dispatch notifies me that the alarm is going off. We return to the building to find it was maintenance. Admittedly relieved, we asked them what they were up to, and they were simply tending to an issue upstairs. We still had to clear every room again, per lockup regulations. We deactivated the alarm, said goodnight to the maintenance fellas, and began our third lockup. The doors to downstairs hadn't been touched. We go to clear downstairs again, and the hairs on both of our necks stand up. We were seriously spooked. Neither of us wanted to go down there. But we had to. I'm certain we nearly held our breath the entire time approaching that last corner. When we rounded it, the desk had company. Two more joined it, facing the wall. The third individual continued to gaze intently at us. We quickly locked up and left, hoping that would be the last time we got called to that building until morning. I'm still fairly new here. And I'm sure that this will not be the last unsettling experience I have on this old campus. Unexplained 911 calls. At our department, we had fairly strict policies regarding how we handled 911 calls that were either mistiles or dead air, static. We always sent 2 officers out to the address to ascertain why and how the call was made. Our state maintained a database of 911 call information and published annual statistics based on that data. Additionally, it was a fairly useful deterrent against the kids who loved prank calling and the old folks who called dispatch just to have someone to talk to. Like I stated before, we were a fairly small county. This particular case involves some fairly strange 911 calls in a newer subdivision in our county. Shortly after I began working as a deputy in early 2001, real estate developers began to build expensive housing in a newly cut subdivision that ran against one of the larger creeks in our county. Seemingly overnight, a huge wooded area turned into $800K plus housing. At night, I and another deputy would go on foot patrol through the new subdivision. This activity allowed us to pass the time on slow nights while also satisfying our curiosity about the size of these houses. However, there was one larger Victorian-style 2-story house that overlooked the river that we typically did a quick patrol through and got the hell out of there. I could never put my finger on it, but I always had a feeling of uneasiness when we walked on the property and through the home as it was under construction. The other deputy, a good friend of mine, always told me the shadows were watching him when we walked through that house. We jokingly called the house Marilyn Manson's crib. We never felt weird in any other location in the subdivision. Months passed, and most of the subdivision was complete by early summer. People began to move in, and all shifts at the sheriff's department began to patrol the area. However, the house I felt strange and had seemingly come to a construction standstill. From talking to the general contractor, the real estate company had 3 potential buyers for the home, but they all backed out for various reasons. Now, this was not uncommon due to the high prices and uncertainty over property taxes, but something in my mind just didn't add up. After speaking to some of the subcontractors involved, it seemed like the potential buyers toured the property and noped out of the deal as quickly as possible. Around December 2001, a buyer was finally found for the house, but the closing had to be delayed to finalize some utility issues in the area. About 2 weeks before the new owners closed on the home, our dispatch received a 911 call from the home with dead air. I was on shift that night and took the lead while another deputy headed my way. I went over to our secondary radio channel and began asking a ton of questions to our dispatcher about the nature of the call. All she could advise was that she was getting dead air, the callback number was showing all 6s, and the address was showing to be the creepy house in the new subdivision. I found this quite odd, as the general contractor sent our department the house numbering for this particular street a couple days before the call. I figured our dispatch supervisor had updated our 911 system to reflect these new addresses. When I rolled up on the house was completely dark. I stayed in my patrol vehicle and hit the house with my spotlight while I waited for backup to arrive. Nothing was found out of the ordinary, and no signs of vandalism were discovered. However, the entire time I was there, I felt a heaviness that I could only describe as someone pushing down on my shoulders and weighing me down. We closed the call out as unfounded. After we cleared, I let our patrol sergeant know what was going on. He felt that it was an error with the 911 system and stated we needed to inform the day shift dispatch supervisor. The next morning, I notified our dispatch supervisor about the error and was met with a perplexed look. She proceeded to tell me this was impossible because the utility company had not run phone service to any of the houses in that part of the subdivision yet. Apparently, this was the utility issue that was preventing closing for the homeowners. She stated that she was waiting until the end of the week to update the 911 system to reflect the new addresses, as it'd be a waste of time to load in new addresses with no telephone service. Thus, the address could not have appeared on our computer-aided dispatch (CAD) system. I believed our dispatch supervisor on her assessment. She had been with the county for 10+ years, seen the 911 system designed and implemented, and generally did a very good job. So, I took her at her word, which unsettled me even more. Determined to get to the bottom of the issue, I passed it on to the day sergeant and asked if one of the deputies could follow up with the phone company if they're out working near that house. Later that evening, I found a note in my patrol box that stated, "Phone company is working on the lines across the street from 12,345 street name. Won't be working on that address until late this week. Phone company doesn't know what's causing the 911 issue. Could it be possible that dispatch recorded the address incorrectly?" That night, dispatch received another 911 call with dead air from the same house, seemingly impossible address included. Once again, we responded, and nothing was found out of the ordinary. The deputy that responded with me that night told me afterward that he felt like he was being watched the entire time we checked the perimeter of the home. I still felt the heaviness when walking around the house. The next morning, the patrol sergeant and I both spoke with the dispatch supervisor and basically told her the impossible was occurring and we needed to get to the bottom of it. She pulled the records from the night before, and sure enough, the impossible address was being sent from some unknown phone lines to our 911 system, which propagated out to the dispatch operator's CAD and our in-car computers. By that evening, we all received an email from the dispatch supervisor stating that she had no idea how this was happening and believed it to be a glitch that she corrected in the 911 system. Despite this, she proceeded to add the new addresses, given that the phone company had nearly completed its work in the area. Basically, she had no damn clue what was causing the problem. We started getting nightly 911 calls to the house. Our patrol sergeant finally told dispatch we wouldn't be responding until the buyers moved in. In some weird way, this made me feel much better. I absolutely hated responding to that house. The following week, during a night off, I overheard on my radio that the patrol sergeant on the differential shift had instructed 2 deputies to investigate the situation at the house. Apparently, he believed that kids were somehow tampering with the phone system and just trying to waste the county's time. Bored and somewhat curious, I called the patrol sergeant on his cell phone and asked if the 911 call came in with dead air, like it had for us multiple times. He said this particular call was downright creepy. He stated dispatch answered the call, and it sounded like someone was either gagged or the phone was completely muffled. The person on the other end of the line appeared distressed and spoke quickly. Now, at this point, the new owners still had not moved into the house and, as far as I know, had not connected the phone service. Similar to previous incidents, the deputies arrived at the scene, inspected the perimeter, and conducted a thorough search of the house, but they found nothing. However, one of them mentioned feeling unusually cold when walking near the back of the property. I talked with him later, as this was fairly strange since he was the only one who felt it, and our average temperature at night in December hovers a little above 55 degrees Fahrenheit. The deputy who reported the coldness was directed by the sergeant to park in front of the house for a couple hours to look out for anything suspicious. Apparently, the deputy lasted about another hour and a half before throwing up about 6 or 7 times on the side of the road and took off for the evening. I talked with him about his experience a couple days later, and he stated he felt fine after he left the area. However, he said the longer he was near the house, the sicker he felt. Anecdotal at best, but it still creeped me out. A few weeks passed, the new homeowners, husband, wife, and 2 kids, moved in, stayed less than 3 months, and put the home on the market at a fairly substantial loss. We received numerous 911 calls from the homeowners ranging from prowlers in the area to break-ins with a suspect still in the residence. Now, the calls were coming from the alarm company instead of the homeowners themselves. Apparently, they installed a fairly high-end security system with motion sensors that called the security company after the owners armed the system in the master bedroom before going to sleep. 8 out of 10 calls we received were for motion sensor activation alarms. I probably responded a total of 20 times in 3 months to the house. I think the alarm company was out there almost as many times but could never find a defect in the system. The owner, husband, was continually traveling for business, leaving the wife and kids home for the better part of the 3 months they lived there. The wife was absolutely convinced the house was haunted. Now, based on the contact I had with the wife, I tended to believe her. She was well educated and very articulate, and her description of shadows moving scared the hell out of me, as that was eerily similar to what my friend encountered. In fact, my deputy friend, who often responded to the calls with me, made it known to the wife that he saw something similar before the house's construction was complete. I still jokingly blame him for costing that family a ton of money after they got the hell out of there. Before the family moved, we encouraged them to get with their alarm company and install cameras that activated with the alarm system to see if they could get to the bottom of what was causing the motion sensors to activate and call the alarm company. However, they never did. I think the wife's persistence got to the husband, and he sold the house just to get her to stop talking about it. In the final month of their stay, our sheriff dispatched an off-duty deputy to sit outside the residence on more than 3 occasions to calm the wife's concerns. Each time, a different deputy was sent. All of them reported feeling strange while on assignment, but no one reported seeing anything suspicious. At least 12 different families have owned that house since the first family left in 2002. We kept getting 911 calls that were either from the alarm company and dead air for as long as I worked at the department. Most owners didn't stay more than a year and a half. I think most of them stayed there long just to sell the house at a reasonable price to the next poor, unsuspecting buyer. I particularly felt bad for the family who got stuck with the house during the housing crisis of 08 to 09. I can't stress how strange this is, as a majority of the original owners in the subdivision continue to live there. And we rarely got calls to any other house in the subdivision. I could probably write a book about that house based on the 9 years I worked at the department. I am a police officer working on an emergency response team in a busy London borough. We took a call to a suspected domestic incident in a block of flats. The informant said that she could hear screaming and sounds of disturbance coming from the flat above her own. Once we arrived, my colleague and I knocked on the door of the flat the informant said the noise was coming from. I had heard nothing on my way up and certainly couldn't hear any disturbance coming from the address. To be honest, I heard nothing at all. After knocking twice we had no response. My colleague left me to go downstairs and speak directly to the informant. I stayed by the door. I knocked again, and an elderly woman answered after some time. She had clearly been asleep and was alarmed to see me standing outside. I told her that someone had called saying that they could hear a disturbance coming from within her address. I asked her if there was anyone else inside with her. She looked bemused and told me that she lived alone and had been sleeping. I asked her if I could come in to satisfy myself that no one else was there. She invited me in, and I walked into what was a small 2-bedroom flat. The flat was in darkness apart from her hall light and her bedside lamp. I began searching through the flat. As I approached the final door, the living room, my colleague called me up on the radio. He told me that he was on his way and asked if I was okay. I told him everything was fine, wondering why he sounded so flustered. He told me that he was with the informant and could also hear screaming and loud thuds coming from the flat I was in. I told him that he must be mistaken, as I was almost done searching the flat and that I had heard nothing whatsoever. I have to admit a feeling of unease as I opened the final door. Like all the other rooms, it was in darkness but was freezing cold. My breath misted immediately. There was no one in the room and no signs of disturbance. No window was open. I called my colleague and asked him to listen out for my footfall. He said he could hear my feet as I stamped them but said that the screaming had stopped. This coincided with me opening the door. I left shortly after apologizing to the elderly woman for waking her. I have no rational explanation for the incident at all. My colleague and I left feeling very creeped out. I worked the night shift at a gas station, so I saw a lot of weird shit, but I think the worst was a guy who stalked me. During a quiet moment, I went outside to smoke. Suddenly, he appeared with a bag of trash and a knife, explaining that he was making flashbangs using a broken Swiffer handle and sparklers he had. According to him, he was working with the CIA and the local PD to catch someone? I'm not entirely sure. He was rambling and pulled out a knife, so I didn't listen incredibly well because I was focusing on what he was doing with the knife. He followed me into the store, cut himself with the knife, bled on everything, and followed me around until he gave me a glass globe from his trash bag and left. He came back randomly during my shifts for a few months, bringing me stuff, and eventually tried to get in my car with me. I have one from my husband. This man tries to debunk everything and doesn't want to believe in the paranormal, but then he is married to me. I don't have things happening daily, but here and there, and a few times he was with me and was like, yeah, that was weird, I can't explain that away. He works nights for UPS and drives the big 18-wheelers. He said he just left the hub with his load, and the sky came falling down. He said it rained so hard he could barely see 10 feet out. So he wasn't going very fast. Then he sees the silhouette of two people, holding hands, walking straight towards his truck in the middle of the street. He slammed on the brakes, but a big truck like that doesn't just stop, it takes a minute. The people appeared clear as day and solid like regular people. Just before he hit them, they looked up and were making eye contact with my husband. He said they were right in front, and he could see details because of his headlights. He said it was a man and a woman, late 20s/early 30s. Both had long wet hair, it was pouring down, remember? The man was wearing a long-sleeved shirt and jeans, and the woman wore a long leather coat. He pushed the brakes as hard as he could but ran right into them as they made eye contact. Except his truck didn't run over anything. He felt nothing. He jumped out of the truck to call 911 and help, but it was 2 a.m., and the road was empty. He said he stood there and couldn't move. He transitioned from the shock of having just run over two people, potentially ending them, to the most unsettling feeling he had ever experienced. He felt that he should leave the area immediately. Just to make sure, my man is such a proper rule follower, he got his big flashlight and made sure that nothing was underneath his truck and also checked if he could see something on his truck. Like a dent or blood. Then he, these are his words, twirled around a couple of times to make sure he is truly not overlooking anything, got in the truck, and left. He was fully anticipating hearing about this on the news, but there was obviously nothing to report. This shook him up so much that he didn't talk about it at all. He told me about 6 months later. I attempted to search on Google for any past incidents, such as the deaths or injuries of two people on that road, but found no relevant information. Until this day, when he drives down the road, at that spot, his truck computer starts beeping, like there is an object he is too close to, but there isn't. It doesn't happen often, maybe 3 to 4 times per year, but this happened 20 years ago, and just last week he said, the truck beeped again at you know where. He said he still feels uneasy even thinking about it. I work as night security for an abandoned racetrack in eastern Wisconsin. What is trapped here may be the most evil thing I've seen. The former Faulkner Speedway was a half-mile dirt oval located around an hour south of La Crosse. This track was only around for around 6 seasons in the late 80s before being shut down due to financial concerns, or so the local papers said. When I read the ad for this place, it was pinned on a local bar's newsboard with a number to call. I called the phone number and, just like that, landed the job. It seemed too easy when I landed the job, and my employer asked me to start immediately, but that was around half a year ago, and I did not have any problems until approximately 3 weeks ago. I walked into the old spectator gates at 8:45. The sun glowed an orangish red as it peeked above the thick oaks. I walked up a slight incline to the old announcer stand, which had been refurbished recently as a security center. I retrieved my time card and clocked in for the night. This location typically exuded tranquility after dark, though it was not uncommon to encounter some teenagers attempting to sneak in for drinks or the occasional couple seeking a private space for their activities. However, this place wasn't as innocent and easy as dealing with dumb teenagers. When the Faulkner family built this speedway, they plowed over a Native American burial ground. This place has always had an eerie feeling. You'll hear things at night. From what my employer has said, something stalks the backwoods. However, I haven't experienced anything so far outside of the occasional light in the distance or noises, but I've chalked it up to just being this place rotting away. I looked at the camera screens. Camera 1 was located at the old infield, looking over the old pit stalls where the race team's haulers would be parked and crews would work on the cars. Camera 2 was placed at the hauler entrance and employee gate, where those pesky teenagers would tend to enter most of the time. Camera 3 was positioned at the old bathrooms and concessions area, just to the right of Camera 4, which overlooked the spectator gate and main entrance. I grabbed my flashlight and set off to do my first evening rounds as the sun dipped below the trees, casting an almost unnatural shadow on the buildings. I walked down the incline towards the main gate, ensuring it was locked as I checked the old bathrooms. They were empty, covered in graffiti and grime. I approached the concession stand, where an old grill and popcorn machine stood, broken and forgotten. A faint noise to my right sounded like a child laughing near the turn 4 stands. Expecting it to be teenagers, I flashed my light over, scanning the stands carefully and methodically. Hello? This place is private property. If you don't come out now, you will be detained and charged with criminal trespass, I bluffed, knowing full well I had no power to do anything, but it worked as a useful scare tactic. I walked towards the stands. The rusted metal of the stands stood proud as the rotting wood crumbled as I scanned again. Nothing, I shrugged it off as the place rotted away as I continued. I followed the fence and trail as I went back into the boneyard, where old race cars were left by teams or donated as last-minute parts cars. Scanning slowly, I reached a small clearing. The overgrown wrecks of old late models dotted the clearing. The place's glory days were evidenced by pieces ripped off and half torn down motors. The wind picked up, the tops of the trees lapping slightly back and forth. I navigated through the sea of car parts, reaching the trail on the other side. A significant crashing noise caught my ears as I swung to the left. I shone my light as I felt my heart rate pick up. The bramble shook as a tree came crashing down, slamming a couple of feet from me. I stood frozen with fear, unable to move, my muscles telling me to run. After the initial shock went through my body, I drew my gun, a compact .45 auto, 6+1 in the chamber. My gut churned with thoughts, but one study remained clear: something brought that tree down. I could not place why my conscience was screaming that, but I shrugged it off, trying to downplay my fear, chalking it up to the night and coincidence. I hurriedly continued, checking the employee gate and scanning the infield, before returning to my booth, looking at the cameras as I sat down and checked my watch. The time read 9:33, only around 30 minutes into my night shift. Looking out the windows of the old press box, I pulled out my laptop and put on some YouTube to help pass the time. I checked the cameras every minute as part of my usual routine, looking for any abnormalities. After a couple of hours of watching cooking videos, my alarm rang, signifying midnight. I got up, stretched my legs, paused the video I was watching, and closed the laptop. I walked down the same incline again when someone whispered to my right. I drew my gun, pointed my flashlight over, and scanned the stands before me. And from the darkness at the edge of the stands, a pair of beady red eyes glared at me again, the eyes being 6 to 8 feet off the ground, and I froze. I shook my flashlight to make sure it wasn't reflecting off something. The eyes disappeared as soon as I did, and I hightailed back into the booth. I paced inside my booth, sweating with fear while replaying what had happened in my mind. I took a breath, pulled out my phone, opened it, and clicked call on a contact named Boss Man. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hello?" The voice on the phone groggily spoke. No doubt I had woken him up. "Hey, boss, this is night security. I am calling you because I saw a pair of red eyes glaring at me from the stands," I spoke, trembling as I paced the room, phone in one hand and my gun in the other. "Oh, you should be fine. It's just the wildlife." The voice spoke, suddenly changing the tone. Even through the phone, I could tell my boss was panicked. "Is it, though? Those eyes had to be at least 7 feet off the ground," I spoke, my pace and heart rate increasing. "Whatever you do, do not go out the door. I will be there to collect you at 6 sharp. It seems the shape is hunting you," he spoke as he hung up the phone with a click. I glared out the window with terror and took a deep breath as I went to check the door's lock. The deadbolt was firmly locked. Walking back to the desk, I heard distorted breathing. I turned to face the window. I could not see outside the window into the darkness. I turned on my phone's flashlight to see a tall, lanky beast standing before the window. A mutilated bear skull adorned its face, and long claws capped his thin fingers. As soon as the light caught this creature, it shrieked, shaking the glass as it darted to the right. I raised my gun, but it disappeared before I could pull the trigger. I knew the game was on now. This thing wanted my blood. This thing was something I had never seen before. It left a profound impact on me. After the creature disappeared, I realized I had pissed myself. I grumbled as I pulled out a spare pair of boxers and pants, throwing them on quickly as I listened when I heard a dull thumping noise coming from the roof. I stood up, watching the screen as the creature cut the camera feed, plunging the screen and the room into a sea of grays. I panicked, knowing that the receiver was right above me. I let out 4 rounds into the roof, and I heard the creature scream in pain before the roof shook as the creature jumped off the top. I carefully reloaded, scanning the windows for any movement. As I sat, the speedway became drenched in silence. I walked over to the screen and shut it off, plunging the room into a sea of black. I sat in darkness for what seemed like years, the sense of time melting into the tick of the clock on the wall. Left with nothing but my thoughts, I reflected on my life, accepting my fate if anything were to happen to me. When I felt my phone vibrate, I pulled it out of my pocket, seeing that it was Boss Man, and picked up the phone on the second ring. "Hello, I see you are still alive." He calmly spoke. "I am on my way, I will be there soon," he added. "Good, I shot that thing, and so far, it has left me alone," I confidently spoke. I heard a grumble on the other end of the line. "It'll come back, you need to be ready, as it won't let you leave until sunrise," he stated bluntly. "Great. Well, I am ready for it when it does come," I stated, followed by a second of silence on the phone. "Listen closely, and I need you to make your way to the infield. That booth isn't safe now that you broke the seal. You must look for a small shack between turns 1 and 2. There you'll be safe. Bossman spoke as I heard a car start as he ended the call. I took another deep breath before turning on my flashlight to unlock the door. I scanned through the window before carefully walking to the door, unlatching it, and slowly peeking out, where I saw nothing. I opened the door further, slowly walking out into the silent night. The wind subsided, leaving a still night, quiet enough to hear a pin drop. I walked down the side of the stands, scanning slowly, looking for any sign of the beast. I made it to the old flag stand, where a gate that led to the old track was left ajar, when I looked down and saw a trail of black liquid dotting the ground, disappearing into the dirt. I walked onto the track, and the overgrown dirt sat still and untouched except for fresh human-like footprints in the soil leading towards the infield. I took another deep breath as I continued forward, searching slowly. I climbed over the old pit wall into the infield, destroyed concrete with brush poking through all I could see. I saw the building illuminated in the fringe of my flashlight. I moved towards the building when I heard a noise off to my right. I swung to look at it and saw the creature staring at me, its mouth agape as it drooled slightly between its razor-sharp teeth. The creature glared at me as I glared at it, not moving my flashlight off it as I walked when I tripped on a piece of exposed concrete and landed with a thud as I felt my ankle pop and a flare of pain run up my leg. I shot back up to see the creature had moved, the adrenaline pumping as I moved towards the shack, hurrying my pace as I neared. I dropped to a knee when I caught the beast charging me from the left side. I fired my entire mag into the beast, seemingly unfazed by the bullet impacts into his chest, its razor-sharp claws slicing across my arm as I ducked to avoid the charge. The beast tumbled over me and slumped. I got up and finished the trek to the shack. Breathing heavily, I locked the door from the inside as a motion-activated light came on, revealing a first aid kit and other supplies, like canned goods and bottled water. I grabbed the first aid kit and a pair of scissors from inside and began cutting my sleeve off. It slumped down, catching on my bracelet as I looked at the wound, 3 cuts, decently deep into the flesh. I grabbed a bottle of disinfectant and poured the bottle on my wound. I groaned in pain as it worked, holding a large bandage and some medical tape, applying the dressing, and then taping it. As the adrenaline wore off, the pain in my ankle grew. I carefully pulled up my pant leg and saw it decently swollen up. "Duck me," I growled as I stood up, sending a shockwave through my leg. It appeared not to be broken, but my ankle was sprained. I shuffled to the window, shining my light through it as the first rays of dawn began peeking through the trees. I breathed an uneasy sigh of relief as I knew Boss Man would arrive soon. I could see the creature. The body stood limp as a black puddle grew around it. I reloaded my gun. I was down to my last full magazine and 1 partial. The sun grew brighter as I saw a lone vehicle pull into the pits from the window. A short, plump man got out of the car, grabbing an Armalite-style rifle from his passenger seat as he checked the body of the creature before walking over to the door, which I promptly unlocked. Without saying a word, he ushered me to the car, where we hopped in and drove out through the employee entrance, where the door shut behind him when he put the car in park. He looked at me and shifted his sunglasses before pulling an envelope from his jacket and handing it to me. $10K cash, and for all purposes, you were attacked by an animal at work. After recovering, you can leave or stay if you'd like. You're the first to survive an encounter with one of those shapes, but there are others. He spoke, and a slight hint of an Irish accent appeared as he shook my hand. It has been quite the night, I said as we drove off towards the nearest town, but that was 3 weeks ago, and my first day back is tomorrow. The guy who worked the day shift quit, but with a hefty pay increase and a new guy to work nights, I'm more than happy to stay working at the Faulkner Speedway. Okay, so I worked overnight security for a mega church for a year. First, they had a separate building for the youth groups that is much older than the church and always puts off a weird vibe. Also, I just found out it used to be a building for psychological studies. One night I'm making my rounds, and I lock the door to a room upstairs. As I turn to leave, I hear 3 loud knocks at the door right behind me. It's 1 a.m., but someone might have been working late in the dark. Still, I open the door and hit the lights. Nothing. Turn around and leave as fast as possible. Another time, true story, it's not as late, but it's still around 8 p.m. It's the National Day of Prayer, so people have been in and out of the church all day. It's also a Friday, so the church has been closed since 2 p.m. I'm making my rounds when I hear what sounds like sobbing coming from a sanctuary. I poke my head in and see a lady sitting in a pew crying. On the outside I'm calm, cool, and collected. On the inside I'm a 3-year-old who just saw the boogeyman. I hit the main lights. The sanctuary only had the stage lights on, which added to the creepiness. The lady stopped crying and turned around and asked if she had to leave. I was shocked she had been here this long since I locked the church entrances from the inside around 2:30 to 3. Right away I could tell she had mental stuff going on. I told her we were closed and she's welcome to come back Sunday. Not so paranormal, but it definitely got the jump on me. Last one, I'll make it quick. It's around 11 p.m. after a Wednesday service. I'm doing some walking through, turning off lights, locking doors, casual stuff. In the hallway over, I hear a janitor cart being pushed around. It's a pretty undeniable sound. I hear them making rounds all the time. I'm thinking my friend Mako is working late, so I go around to talk to him, and it's empty, nobody in the hall or anywhere. I call Mako and ask if he's still on campus, and he says he left at 10 p.m., so it should be just me there. I'm sure there's a reason for everything. Your mind can trick you, especially in eerie places like large churches. Not all your coworkers are alive. My paranormal experiences while working at Cave of the Winds in Manitou Springs, Colorado. To give you a basic rundown of the tours offered and the tours I gave. As of right now, they have 3 tours open to the public: Discovery, Lantern, and Caving 101, and 2 tours purely dedicated to schools and other organizations, Bats and Caves and Underground Adventure. I gave all except Caving 101, as I wasn't an experienced spelunker and couldn't comfortably guide groups on their hands and knees through various parts of the system. There are 2 cave systems they use, Cave of the Winds and Manitou Grand Caverns. The Lantern Tour occurred in the Manitou Grand Caverns, which also hosted C-101 and about 15 minutes of UA. This is the tour we will discuss. For some background, Kato has electricity throughout. There are concrete and electric lights through the entire cave, even stairs and handrails for accessibility. The Manitou Grand has no electricity aside from an emergency use call box in the first and main cavern. There is no concrete, no usable handrails, and only 2 staircases formed by hand from the naturally existing limestone. This is why it is called the Lantern Tour. We guide people through the cavern using actual metal bucket lanterns, relying solely on the dim flicker of firelight. We also carry flashlights to point out various formations, highlight especially slick surfaces, and for emergencies. Did I mention that the Lantern Tour was purely a haunted tour? What other theme could be suitable for a barely visible, quiet, cold, and dark tour? So, I don't know how many of the stories we told were true or false. I'm inclined to believe they all hold some truth to them, due to my experiences, but again, I cannot go over specifics due to legal reasons. I can tell you the underlying story was a fairly insensitive story about a Native American mummy, and for reasons I'll explain, I started paying my respects to this spirit pretty early on. During the training process, we would follow at the rear of tours, listening to our more experienced coworkers give their tours in whatever unique and individual way they did. We were constantly going on these tours. We would be in the cave for hours, just piggybacking on the next tour that started coming through and learning from that guide what we could. On one particular tour, my friend and I constantly saw a figure looking out from holes in the ceiling, glittering eyes just watching us, following us, and I'm not putting a lot of emphasis on this because I want to stress that it wasn't scary. No, really. You're taught from day one that caves will mess with and distort your sense of reality. It is already too dark to see 5 feet in front of you and so quiet that when left alone, you'll hear your blood in your ears. So if I think I'm seeing a little creepy golem dude hanging out in the ceiling, I am not going to think he's real. LH and I recently discussed and joked about the figure, but I can assure you it was not real. What was real was when I and another coworker were standing side by side in a different part of the cave later that same day, standing in a long passage that led to what most people thought was the scariest room. I didn't like having the dark behind me, and I was constantly looking over my shoulder down the passage, straining to see the rotting wood fence and ladder farther down. During one over-the-shoulder glance, I caught sight of a hand sitting on the wood railing. Just a hand, nothing more, gray and not quite opaque, resting. And as I watched, it dragged away, off the railing, and vanished. I immediately pulled my coworker away, we'll call him JD, and started explaining what I had seen. JD thought it was weird, but he hadn't seen it himself, so whatever. I hadn't had any more experiences until the end of my last tour, on my first day of solo tours. Aside from the ever-present feeling of being watched and the paranoia that just naturally comes from being in a cave, I had gotten used to the various sensations felt during the tour. I was confident on my first 3 tours, and at the end of my first day, I was guiding my group down a narrow staircase that led into the first room, which poured into Kato through a man-carved tunnel, using my flashlight to better illuminate the steps. When I turned to look down the tunnel into Kato, I could hear the tour getting ready to do cave darkness, so I turned back to tell my tour to shine their lanterns away when my flashlight caught a pair of brown leather shoes, pointed at me, on the final step of the staircase. As soon as I saw them, they were gone, and I fell against the wall with a gasp. And a lady, bless her, got so excited I thought she was going to fall down with me. A gray, translucent hand on a railing is one thing, but a pair of clear as day Victorian-era shoes pointed at you, 3 feet away, is another thing entirely. I knew exactly who that spirit was. We'll call him George because he's dead and that's his name. George was the founder of both cave systems. He lived in the Manatee Grand Caverns with his wife, and he regularly gave his own haunted tours in the same cave system. This was my first day of solo tours, and those were the feet of the man who lived in the cave, telling me that he's definitely still there. Oh yes. I'm not going to go over the little experiences outside of these two, so I'm going to skip to the most compelling encounter I had. After giving these tours for about a month, I realized that I had become a little too comfortable. I remember one particular day, telling tours the activity was low and to not get their hopes up, but I made the mistake of announcing that inside the cave on one tour, yes, stupid move. It didn't take long for me to get the message. After guiding my tour through a barely 4 feet tall passage, I stood with my back to the second staircase leading down into the main cavern, facing my group as they shuffled into the room. While I was waiting, I heard a PSST from behind and beneath me, and I turned, and I pulled out my flashlight, and no one was there. After however many tours I had given, never had I heard a voice. Even just a PSST was more than I had ever heard. Undoubtedly unsettled, I turned my back to the wall and aimed my lantern down the stairs. I continued on with the tour, staying on that platform and shining my lantern on the stairs as I verbally guided my group into the main cavern. We have people stand by a fence in this room, which is to the left, and as I descended the stairs, I heard extremely loud footsteps coming from the right. Now here's the thing about paranormal encounters in groups: if you're being targeted, there's a chance no one will experience the same thing. As we age, we build up mental barriers that block us from paranormal activity and spiritual encounters. Spirits can break through this at the expense of using energy, but not everyone will be affected. So in my group of 10, only 2 people heard those footsteps aside from myself. I shined my flashlight, and of course, no one was there to the right. My entire group had listened and stood to the left. I continued down the stairs, and I continued my tour, painfully aware that something was going on, that I was being messed with, and I knew exactly why. Nervous, I stood with my back to the passage those footsteps originated from, with my lantern shining behind me. I made a mental note of where every single person was, and I continued. I was suddenly cut off by a single step that sounded to my right. Might I add, I stood next to a wall? Okay, I'm being messed with, I am being targeted. And I don't know what's going to happen next. I tried to continue my tour when the kerosene canister was stripped from the bottom of my lantern and chucked a few feet behind me. Now, George is nothing but an entertainer, and he put on a good show. I screamed, of course. I jumped and turned around, frantically shining my flashlight as I fell to the ground on my knees and started crying. I had to apologize to my tour and explain that, shit guys, this is my first paranormal experience of this caliber. I hadn't had this happen before. Needless to say, everyone was more than sympathetic and a little freaked out themselves. That was my biggest experience, but by far not my creepiest. We always gave tours, no matter the size. Lanterns topped out at 12, but the ticket booth would overbook on busy days. The only time we couldn't was if a female tour guide had a group of all males, or vice versa. There were a few times, 3 most notably, where I gave tours to groups of 2 or 4, and these were always couples. On these tours, I would take them to parts of the cave off limits to the lantern tour. I would show them more of the formations, and really, they were the most in-depth tours, but also the scariest. At a certain point, I could walk into the cave and know exactly what spirits were present and what kind of activity I could expect. George's wife was my most frequented spirit. She loved my tours, and I had the privilege of seeing her from the thigh down on multiple occasions. She always wore a purple dress with lacing at the hem and those black Victorian lace-up boots, you know the ones. On one particular tour, I had a foreign couple who had landed that day, and I kid you not, I have never wanted to go in the cave less than I did that day. The vibes were just off, wrong. I felt dread, and every step I took felt heavy and forced. Thankfully, my boyfriend got altitude sickness, and they called it short before we made it through the first passage. I didn't have to face whatever was waiting. On a tour with another couple, I didn't start feeling off until we got to the most scary room, and this was the only tour in which I ever felt negativity in that room. For some context, there was a 7-foot pit at the end of this room, and we told a story about a creature rising from the pit. Honestly, this was the peak of all my tours. I can't help but gloat. I scared my groups so bad. On multiple occasions, people refused to look into the pit, and several times, people would claim they could see a figure waiting by the pit. I convinced myself I had seen it too a few times. Though, I wasn't ever really scared. not until this couple. Just walking down the passage began to fill me with discomfort, all the hair on my body began to stand on end, I began to shiver and shake, and I just felt absolute dread. I turned to the couple, I told them what I was feeling, and I asked them what they wanted to do. Covered in goosebumps themselves, they decided to go ahead and skip that part, and so we did. I learned pretty quickly that nothing good follows those feelings, and it's unfortunate for those who decide to persist. Coworkers have had their hair yanked, their clothing pulled, and their necks choked, some have gotten sick, some have passed out, and others have been pushed into the pit. I wasn't going to be like them. This is about the time I started paying my respects to the mummy at the end of my tour and stressing to people that what had happened to this spirit was beyond a campy ghost story. It was insensitive. The mummy was removed from their burial site and brought into the cave, a place the local tribe deemed a place of evil because of the howling sounds made by the wind, and it was wrong, and the mummy was worthy of respect. I assure you, I never again experienced the same level of dread. I do have many other stories, but these really cover the major bases. When you work in a haunted cave, give haunted tours, and get to know the spirits that reside there, you really start working with them. It becomes a partnership almost, we're both working together to scare people, and in the end, they're just co-workers. I worked the night shift at a medical company. Being that we were often slow with work, my co-worker and I asked to be cross-trained in the warehouse to count inventory. We were the only workers in this giant warehouse after 4 p.m., and no one else had access to it, other than security and custodians. We turned off the lights at 1 a.m. while closing the warehouse. The switch was on the opposite end of the building from the exit. We were walking down the dark aisle to exit into some offices, and once we got to the door did not open. It's a sensor door, so it should have opened as soon as we touched it, but it didn't. We figured maybe security had overridden the lock and locked us in. At that moment we heard footsteps coming behind us and what sounded like something metal scraping on the floor and hitting the racks, like a metal pole being dragged. We panicked, and the footsteps got louder and closer, and we frantically were pushing the door to get out, but it wouldn't open. In the reflection of the window, we saw a dark figure standing right behind us, and just then, the doors flew open on their own, and we ran out of there so fast. Turns out, security and custodial teams have all experienced creepy stuff at one point or another in the warehouse at night. No one seemed to be alarmed when they informed us that this was a common occurrence. After that experience we just left the lights on and let security turn them off for us. Lots of creepy stuff happened in our 6 months of working there. It's my first night working as a mall security guard. I hate it. I started working at the Briarfield Mall around a month ago, and up until tonight I was working the day shift. I liked it, surprisingly, where I worked there wasn't much trouble. While working there, I encountered a lost child, a few shoplifters, and even a brawl in the food court, but that was the extent of my interactions. The only part I hated was walking past the department stores. I've never liked mannequins, but these ones were a special kind of uncomfortable. They were the kind that had the faintest imprint of facial features, shallow curves where the lips and eyes would be. I hated walking past them. I know it's cliché, and I know it's stupid, but of course I felt like they were watching me. I read somewhere about a theory that humans are afraid of things that reside in the uncanny valley because a long time ago our ancestors faced something that looked human but wasn't. Maybe that ancient, primordial fear is what I felt when I walked by them, the feeling of being prey. I walked by them as little as possible, and when I did, I turned my head in the other direction. In fact, I hardly even went in that section of the mall. I and the other day's guard had split the mall in half in terms of where to patrol, and I made sure to steer clear of the half with the department stores. That was, at least, until last week. There was a fight in a Macy's about one thing or another. The weird thing was that the people just gathered around and watched. Usually there's one or two well-meaning workers that try and at least interfere. This time, they just sat and watched, like the crowds watching the barbarians in Rome. And then, right as we pulled the fighters apart, they just dispersed and went about their shopping as if nothing had happened. As we dragged the idiots who decided to fight, apparently over a pair of shoes, to our office, my gaze couldn't help but wander towards the mannequins. They seemed different, not even recently changed, but different from when I saw them on the way in to break up the fight. They had been rearranged this week, but that wasn't what was off about them. They're subtle, barely their facial features felt more pronounced and obvious. Their faint smiles looked more like soft, toothy grins. Their eyes, once merely indentations, appeared to be beginning to bulge out of their heads. They seemed more alive altogether, like the fight and sudden burst of hate had aroused them from a deep slumber. I brushed off the familiar feeling of being watched and helped my fellow guard drag the ornery shoppers out of the store. Later that week, a few days ago, I got reassigned to the night shift. I wasn't entirely sure that we needed one, Our mall was a fairly small one, and thus I was the lone guard on night duty. I showed up around 8, when the mall closed, got some tips and a recap from the day guard, and got the keys to my office. It was small, with just a desk with a security camera monitor on it, a trash can, and a poorly constructed wooden chair. The day guard told me to take good care of the building, and just like that, the mall that was bustling and busy just a moment ago was nothing more than a ghost town. For the first few hours everything was fine, but eventually I got bored and started to do laps in the building. It had never felt so big. Maybe it was the lack of people, maybe it was the moonlight, but I was shocked at the sudden vastness and was once again struck with a wave of familiar fear. It was only now that I realized where my laps around the mall had taken me. I was standing face to face with one of the mannequins from the department store. I felt my stomach tie itself into knots as I lost my balance from fear, and I tumbled to the ground, the still unmoving mannequin towering above me. I pulled myself back up and started to walk away. That's when I heard it. The sound was a wet crunch, like a bone being broken from the inside. I turned to look in the direction it had come from and found myself once again staring into the unnaturally visible eyes of the mannequin's head, this time positioned directly at me. I immediately left the area and began running to my office. Behind me, a cacophony of noises sounded off in the darkness. Wet crunch after wet crunch, what sounded like hundreds of joints popping and breaking echoed all around me, but I couldn't bring myself to turn around. I ran back to my office and checked the security cameras to see whether I had imagined everything. I made sure to lock the door and prop the chair under the handle, just in case I hadn't gone insane. I flipped through the screen, searching for the window I had first heard the sound at. I rewound it and saw that as I had begun to walk away, the mannequin's head had turned to watch me, all on its own. I realized I now had to see what had happened as I had begun to run from it. I flipped to the hallway I'd just run down, where I'd heard the chorus of noise. Each mannequin, in every store, had their faces and hands pressed against the glass, all the while standing perfectly still. I didn't think it was a position the mannequin joints could form, but at that point it was the last thing on my mind. At that moment it occurred to me that they looked shockingly like the crowd that had watched the fight. I know I should have left, but I just couldn't bring myself to leave the room. I knew that if they could see me, I'd hear those awful sounds again. I knew that if I left my office, they would be standing between me and the exit. After an hour of sitting and waiting, I heard the glass shatter. It was coming from the camera, which was still on the mannequins with their hands pressed against the glass. However, not all of them were affected. One of them, the one I'd come face to face with, had begun to move again. The thing swung its head up and then thrust it into the window. The rest of the mannequins began to follow suit, and in a moment the glass, my last hope of keeping them as far as possible from me, had been shattered and fell to the ground. The sound of 1,000 tiny shards cascading to the ground and breaking was almost worse than the sound of the mannequin's movement. Then the one that had broken the glass began to move his arms, which were still in the position of being pressed against the glass, which was no longer there. He stepped into the ground floor of the mall and the moonlight, and once again the others followed suit. Then they began to shamble in every direction. Some went towards the food court, some towards the arcade, they just aimlessly limped wherever they felt like. I turned off the monitor and could no longer force myself to watch this parade of grotesque creatures. I turned and fell to the floor, reaching for the trash can in vain and ending up vomiting onto the carpeting. I heard a cracking sound and shot up, slipping on my own vomit and falling backwards onto the wooden chair, breaking it in half. What I had heard was the sound of one of those things shuffling towards my office, and the sound of the chair snapping had alerted a whole horde of them to my presence. Once again the noise of dozens of them crawling towards me sounded off into the night, echoing seemingly endlessly. Since I'd broken the chair, my only thing between me and them was a frail door lock. Without thinking, I slid the desk, monitor, and all in front of the door, all the while hearing those god-awful noises. When they'd finally reached it, I heard them begin to scratch and pound on the door. After a while of their futile attempts to break down the door, the noises stopped. I moved the desk back from the door so I could lean my head against it and listen. All I heard was faint shuffling, and I assumed they were beginning to return to their store windows, as it was already almost morning. I'd never wished for the sun to rise so much. I had no reason to believe they'd stop when it came up, but I felt safer knowing the night was almost over. All at once, my door was split in two, and hundreds of hands reached towards me, gripping my shirt, my arms, and everything. Inside their plastic exteriors, I could feel something clawing at its own skin, desperate to get out. As they grabbed me and pulled me into the light of dawn, I lost all hope. There seemed to be double the amount I had seen on the monitor, and each mannequin's face was pointed right at me. They once again looked like a crowd that had watched the fight. The anticipation of what would happen next was plain to see on their faces, which looked more pronounced than ever. It seemed as if each tooth in each of their smiles had been chiseled out of the hard plastic to be special to them. Each eye looked almost capable of producing tears. They watched as the mannequin that had broken the glass first dragged me back into the store it had come from. As my vision began to fade, the last thing I saw was the horde of plastic monstrosities climb back into their display cases. The last thing I heard was the terrible popping noise. I awoke to the daylight shining on me. I opened my eyes and felt the sting of my vision adjusting to the light. I could see a crowd of shoppers in front of me, staring and going about their lives. I tried to move but was unable, and a wave of panic swept over my body. I jerked my eyes to see as much as I could around me and saw a mannequin to either side of me. As I stared, paralyzed in fear, I realized where I was. I was in the display case from the department store I'd broken up the fight in just a couple days ago. In fact, I was in the exact same spot as the mannequin that I had first seen move. As my vision began to fade and my eyes slowly started to seal, I looked ahead and saw my reflection in the glass in front of me. It was nothing more than a dull, almost faceless mannequin. I was working security. This was the early 2000s. That becomes important later. Normally my company did events, but they would branch out a bit here or there if you just needed a warm body to stand around looking imposing. I got a graveyard shift watching a gate. There was some road construction in my town. They were supposed to stop running trucks in the area at a certain time of night because it butted up against residential, but the city was getting complaints of large trucks. My job was to watch that gate and take license plates. I wasn't even supposed to stop them. Just report plate numbers in the morning. The first night, one truck, I was working triple shifts. The boss even told me I could sleep as long as I woke up when a truck passed. Second night, no trucks. The third night is where shit got weird. I am sitting in my car, partially hidden in the shadows. I hear this buzzing. High-pitched from a distance, but it's getting closer. I thought maybe it was just a really loud version of that sound power lines make, but then it was right above my car. Dips low. This shit is loud. Then just gone. They were building a new road to connect two major existing roads through a canyon. I was sitting in a more commercial section. Around me, the parking lot lights started going out. That sound would come back near the light, they would go off, then disappear, and the lights would come back on. Varying businesses. The cause wasn't some timer or power outage. Then lights started going out in a straight line down through the canyon. At this point I'm out of the car with my super bright flashlight trying to see anything around me and find out what's making that sound. All the lights on my side go off, and the sound is coming closer again. I'm back in the car with locked doors, and the buzzing is getting closer and louder than before. It's above me again. I'm making myself as small as possible, and it sounds like something is banging on the car. It's not shaking, but it sounds like a dozen people are hitting it. Then gone. All sound stops, and lights come back on. I informed my boss that I had finished the triples for that week. Now if you asked me to describe the sound today, I would say drone. It sounded just like a very high-performance drone does. But we didn't have those in like 2001, and this sounds so much larger. But that same super high pitch. Man killed in accident keeps working? I'm a machinist in a small job shop. I've only been working in the shop for about a year, but this story happened to me, and I wonder if it is a warning. The shop is an older one, with manual machines. Nowadays, the bigger, more expensive shops have CNC machines that use computers, and if they do have manual machines, they're a bit safer than the antiques we have at our place. The job is dangerous, but not if you pay attention and don't do something stupid. Occasionally, you may encounter a machinist who has lost a finger or something similar, but the majority of our employees are relatively safe. Because we're a smaller shop, we don't run the machines 24 hours a day like the big industrial guys do. Like Boeing, we do have a swing shift, but no graveyard shift. I had only been working there about a month and was on the swing shift with a couple other new guys. The other 3 employees had gone home already, and we were busy cleaning up shop before clocking out. It was a Saturday, and Sunday is when no one usually works. The boss is kinda religious, so everyone was eager to leave. There were only 3 of us left, and we have a checklist at the end of the night to make sure we're not wasting electricity and that we have the place locked down. The shop is in an industrial part of town, and people have tried to break in before. I put away my toolbox and grabbed my gear to go home when I barely heard one of the machines running. The other guys are still in the control room office, but I was curious and thought maybe I had left the vacuum running or something. I go out into the shop, and one of the employees is still on the lathe. I'm a little annoyed, but being the new hire, I don't want to tell anyone what to do yet. I walk over there, and it's one of the older machinists. He's about 55 to 65, with short white hair, and he's wearing a tan-colored vest, jeans with suspenders, and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. I remember this exactly, because we're not supposed to be wearing long sleeves ever when working. He's an older guy, so I think he probably wouldn't appreciate one of the younger punks telling him what he can and can't do. I stand there for a minute, and he finally looks over at me and smiles. Howdy. I remember that phrase too, because it seemed like the perfect thing for an old-timey guy like him to say. I say hello, introduce myself, and tell him I'm kind of new here, but we are all planning on closing up the shop now, and I was wondering why he's still working. I tried to be as tactful as I could, but he was concentrating on what he was doing and wasn't paying much attention to me. Then I asked if he needed any help. He said he was almost done and would lock up after us, then winked at me and said something like, "I know the boss pretty well." I said that all sounds good, and if it was okay with him, we'd be leaving now. He was watching his work again and just nodded. He was not unfriendly, but he was clearly preoccupied. So Monday I come into work about 20 minutes early. I like to have coffee in the office/control room before work. My boss arrives, upset that we left the lights on all weekend. I explained to him that we left, and there was an old guy that stayed after and said he knew the boss and thought it would be okay. My boss says, "No one works here alone, ever." And then he pulls up the security tape to find out who the guy was. We watched the tape a few times. On it, you can see me walk out into the shop and stand next to the lathe. The lathe is running, but I just stand there, and then I pick up my gear and walk away while the lathe keeps running. The lathe runs for about 10 more minutes, then shuts off. There was no one standing at the machine working. We backed up the tape and saw the machine start up by itself, me standing there, then walking away, and then the machine stopping by itself. This is a safety issue, and so the boss calls our maintenance tech on the phone and tells me to get to work. He's not as angry but doesn't say a word to me besides quietly telling me, "Okay. Get to work, and be safe." So I asked around the shop about what happened, and this is what I've pieced together. About 2 years ago the old guy was the owner of the shop, back when they were making custom replacement parts for farm machinery. His name was Ron, and he always wore a yellow/tan vest and was very hands-on with the work the shop was doing. One day he leaned over a part on the lathe and was pulled into the machine and killed. It was an extremely brutal method of passing away. One can only hope for a swift demise. There was an investigation, and they found out his vest had caught on the chuck and pulled him into the machine before he could stop it. Most of the guys in the shop, who were good friends with Ron, saw it happen. That's when most of the older machinists that worked there decided it was time to retire, and a couple of them needed therapy for what they saw happen. That's also why the new guys like us were brought in. The owner's son, my boss now, ran the shop but wasn't a machinist himself. I didn't want to ask the boss about it, because I think if he thought I saw his dad's ghost, he might hate me or might get emotional about it. Like I said, he's kinda religious, so I don't know how he would take it, and I'm not about to ask him for details about his father's death. I was a night security guard at a parking garage. And this is why I quit. 8 months ago I interviewed for a position as a security guard. The location was a 24-hour parking structure in the downtown area of my city. During my interview, they asked if I could work the graveyard shift, despite my preference for a daytime position. I was not thrilled. I almost turned it down. But my bills weren't going to pay themselves, and I didn't have anything else lined up. So I took the job. It wasn't awful, to be honest. It was quiet most of the time, and not a lot happened. At first. My job was to show up at 10 p.m., work my shift, and go home at 6 a.m. I tend to be an antisocial person, so the lack of human interaction was actually kind of comforting. I didn't even have to interact with my supervisor most of the time. I would come to the office on the ground floor through an employee entrance, clock in at the computer, and then make my rounds. Now, movies would have you believe I get to sleep with my feet up on my desk while a bank of monitors lights the room through the night. Honestly, I wish that were the case. In reality, there were 2 screens split into 6 feeds apiece, all crammed together so they were basically thumbnails. 1 camera for each floor of the garage. The cameras were mounted over the elevator doors in the center of each floor. They would oscillate back and forth slowly. They didn't actually catch very much. If I spotted something out of the ordinary on one of my feeds, it would be my job to go check it out. I barely spent any time in the actual office, though. I was encouraged to walk the floors and scope things out. Fill out the space. I liked this. Plus I got fresh air. That tiny concrete room made me feel claustrophobic. On most nights I would walk from one floor to the next, casually looking between cars and into the occasional window to make sure nobody was attempting any break-ins. I preferred to take the stairs because it was more interesting than the elevators. Since it was late at night, there were actually pretty few cars coming in or out of the garage. The office building next door used the garage for their employee parking, but only about 3 employees used it that late at night. There were a few regulars that I began to recognize, and being as antisocial as I am, I only ever exchanged eye contact or a nod. The parking structure had retractable shutters at the entrance and exit of the building. If someone wanted to park, they would drive up and press a button on a console, which produced a ticket. The shutter would open and let them in, closing behind as they drove through. When they left, they would put the ticket into an exit console and insert payment, and then the garage shutter would slide open to let them out. The regulars, or long-term customers, sometimes had fob cards that were prepaid and would open the door if scanned at the console. It was quite thrilling, I must admit. There were very rarely any people walking or passing through the garage during my shift. I would see people leave after parking and return to exit, but the rest of the night, it was quiet and still. If you were on foot, there were only 2 ways to get in or out of the garage: the exit-only steel door at the bottom of the staircase and the elevators. Every once in a long while, I would help someone jump their car or call a locksmith to get their keys locked inside their vehicle. Even these one-offs were rare. This seemed like the perfect job for me, weirdly enough. I would do my rounds, clock out at 6 a.m. sharp, and take the bus home. I got used to being up all night and sleeping during the day. I didn't have to deal with much. I basically just had to be there. Then, things changed. One night around 2 a.m., I heard a loud crash somewhere on the upper levels. I was walking on the 2nd or 3rd floor when I heard it. The sound seemed to come from at least 5 or 6 floors above me. It was like somebody had thrown a dumpster off the roof of a skyscraper. It rumbled through the emptiness of the concrete structure like a thunderclap. One tremendous crash, followed by silence. I stopped and listened for a few seconds afterward, waiting for anything else, my heart slamming in my ears. I took the stairs up, fueled by adrenaline. At each floor I glanced in to see if the crash came from there, then moved up to the next floor. Before I realized it, I was on the roof of the structure. Dazed, I headed back, a little slower this time. I didn't find a damn thing. My initial thoughts went a car accident. But there wasn't. I had no choice but to file a report and move on with my life. I never found the source of the noise. A few weeks passed. Then one night I'm on my lunch break around 1 a.m., eating lunch in the office. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement on the left side monitor. I checked the display closely. On the 6th floor, some jackass was running from one side of the floor to the other, then back again. It looked like an adult or possibly a teenager with long, messy black hair. It was hard to make out any other details, partly because this person was moving fast, but also because the individual feeds were pretty small. I grabbed my big mag light and ran out of the office. Again I took the stairs. 30 seconds later I arrived at the 6th floor. I took in my surroundings. The figure wasn't there. I walked slowly to the other side of the floor, sweeping my light as I did. As I reached the end and turned around to head back towards the stairs, I just caught the last glimmer of light as one of the elevators at the center of the floor slid closed. I sprinted back to the stairs, knowing I could beat the elevator to the street level. I was jumping down the last 5 steps or so on each floor, moving fast. I opened the exit-only door and pushed my way out into the street. I waited outside the elevator for a few seconds until the door slid open. Aside from some ads for the local Target, the elevator was empty. Son of a witch, I hissed aloud. The person must have gotten off on a different floor. I jogged around to the side of the building and entered through the steel employee door. I went straight to the office to check the monitors. I saw no movement at all. It was pretty weird that somebody was running through the parking structure like that. In the end I wrote an entry in the logbook and continued my shift. And nothing more happened. Until the next night. Around 1:30 a.m. the following night, I had lunch again. My eye caught something on one of the screens. I quickly hopped up and checked the feeds. Floor 7. A similar dark figure with no discernible features ambled into view. The person was just walking. Very slowly. I watched on the 2-inch by 3-inch thumbnail as the figure shuffled directly towards the camera from a shadowy back wall. I strained at the figure on the screen, trying to make out details. The strangest thing, though, is that it's like they were cut out of black paper. This person appeared to be completely flat, in color and volume. For your reference, the cameras in my parking structure were mounted above and between 2 elevator doors situated at the center of each floor. They oscillate on a 180 degrees axis. In their leftmost position, they show a ramp with which cars descend to the next level. At their rightmost position they show a ramp with which cars ascend to reach the current level from below. When the cameras point straight forward, you can see a low point, and the ground inclines in both directions. When I saw this strange, featureless shadow figure moving slowly from the center to the elevators. Something felt very wrong. Every time the camera came back to the center, the figure was closer. I had to remind myself that I was on the clock. My mind tried to assemble a plausible story to explain the shadowy figure. Maybe this person was lost and needed help getting out of the structure. Maybe it was a vagrant that had gotten in through the elevators and was ducking around. For a second my memory flashed back to when I was in training. My trainer had told me that homeless people sometimes got into the structure. He told me a story about one transient in particular who would enter through the elevators and hang out in the shadowy staircases between floors. The trainer would find the guy passed out on the steps sometimes. Once with a needle in his arm. I tried to convince myself what I was looking at was a homeless guy. Somehow in the back of my mind, however, I knew this was not the case. This was something else. Nevertheless, I had a job to do. I got up and headed to the 7th floor. The first thing I noticed as I approached was that there was no light shining into the stairwell. Normally, sterile fluorescent light would spill into the opening from the overhead lamps. Floor 7 was dark. I clicked my mag light on and aimed it into the parking area from the stairs. At first, nothing. A white Nissan Murano sat silently on the other end of the floor. Otherwise, there were no other vehicles. And no figure. Then, a shadowy shape stirred on the other side of the car. It was impossible to make out what it was from the stairs, but I could see something moving between the tires. I approached cautiously with my light trained on the car. I patted my pockets with my left hand and realized I had left my phone in the office. Stupid. As I got closer to the vehicle, I could hear a heavy scratching noise on the floor of the structure. It sounded like someone dragging a piece of metal across the ground slowly. I swung out wide, keeping my distance from the car so I could shine my light safely at whatever was over there. I took the last step and aimed the flashlight at the other side of the car. The light clicked off. "Oh shit," I blurted out, my voice echoing through the structure. I strained to make out anything now as my eyes slowly adjusted to the dark. I could make out the basic shape of the car about 15 feet in front of me but couldn't see any movement. The scratching sound was gone. In a panic I smacked the back of the maglite with the palm of my hand. The bulb weakly flickered and finally stayed on. I pointed the beam of light with a shaky hand towards the shadowy spot in front of me. No one there. Not a soul. Then a sound, from behind me. I pivoted in that direction to see a thing. Slowly approaching. It was humanoid and bipedal. The figure easily stood 7 feet tall, maybe taller, but incredibly thin. The thing had pale gray skin and was completely naked. It reached out to me desperately with impossibly long arms. I could see what looked like a pained expression on its wrinkled, eyeless face. Its mouth hung open, agog and filled with brown glistening teeth. Taut skin covered useless eye holes. A mane of long, tangled black hair spilled from the top of its head and past its shoulders in a matted, scraggly mess. Its fingers trembled as it reached for me. A deep groan escaped its cavernous mouth. I tried to run. Believe me. Adrenaline dumped into my system, and my fight or flight response engaged. In this case, without thinking, my body chose fight. I swung the maglite hard and connected solidly with its left hand. The creature let out a piercing shriek that tore through the night, echoing within the parking structure. The thing reeled back and fell over. Instead of falling prone, however, the thing arched its slender back and planted its hands and feet, running on all fours. It moved unnaturally quickly towards me. It let out another shriek, this one louder and more furious sounding. I swung the steel flashlight again, this time over my head and downward. I caught the creature square in the top of its huge head. A mist of droplets splattered on my face. But I hardly noticed. Now my flight response made its appearance. I booked it in the direction of the stairs, moving faster than I had ever moved before. My muscles tightened into knots as I grabbed the railings, skipping 5 stairs at a time. I lost my footing and tumbled down the very last section of steps leading to the exit-only door. Pain bloomed as I smashed my face into the heavy metal door. I didn't stop. I quickly rolled out of my fall and was up again in a second, running out into the quiet street. Without thinking, I dashed across the street to the bus stop and panted there with my hands on my knees. I struggled to catch my breath. After long consideration and trying to process what had happened and what I had seen, I decided to wait until sunrise to re-enter the structure. Around 5:30 a.m. I reluctantly entered through the employee door to the security room. I scribbled a note in the logbook, grabbed my shit, and left. That's the last time I ever went near that cursed parking garage. And so it goes. I don't know what I saw, and frankly, I don't want to know. I received several calls from my supervisor over the next few days, but I ignored them. After a while the calls stopped. I am sure they will find a suitable replacement for me. I will be seeking employment elsewhere. I did learn something from all of this. Some stones are best left unturned.